All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first workshop of the new year, 2019. Happy New Year to everybody. We're going to this morning talk about the lease revision, I guess, for Captain's Barbecue and issues and concerns related around the current building and a path to move forward. So before we do that, I'm going to call us to order and ask that everybody join me in a Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And as we do at each of our meetings, I would ask that everyone please join us in a moment of silence so that we can take a second to remember those folks that serve us here in our county, in our state, and in our great United States military, and think about those first the responders that put their life on the line every day to keep us safe. Okay, thank you. Before we begin, I just want to remind everybody here, the audience, that this is a workshop format. We have a lot of folks here this morning, and the workshop is a little less formal than our regular commission meeting with respect to the dialogue that'll happen up here. But we'll also go through the same process as we're finished with presentations. We'll move to public comment. We'll do them all at the end of the presentations with the same rules of 3 minutes for anyone that would like to speak. And I would just ask again that we all be respectful of the time limits and everybody else's opinions as well. Look forward to good dialogue, and I believe we'll get that started and kick it off with you, Mr. Coffey.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry.
Just a second. Do we have a time certain on this event?
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me. I apologize. Just also want to remind everyone here that we have a hard stop time of 11:30 this morning due to commitments that other folks have. So that's what time we'll be shutting everything down. Hopefully, we'll get everything in. So with that said, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Mr. Coffey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're going to start with a legal briefing from the county attorney to kind of give you the overall, have him address some of the overall arching legal issues surrounding this issue. That's fine, either way. You stand up if you want to.
Okay, let's make sure this is working. Okay, sounds like it's working, right? Okay, good morning. Thank you very much. I had suggested to Mr. Coffey it's probably a wise idea to start with what the legal platform, what the legal context is. Obviously, we're in a workshop. I know you all know the meaning of a workshop. You're not compelled to make a decision today, by the way, although it is marked for a special meeting. If you choose to make a decision, you can. Now, I want to focus, though, on why you're even talking about this. We have to start out with the absolute existing facts, and they are, number one, we have a valid lease in place, and I'm talking about the one that we executed in 2011 and amended in 2015 and amended again in 2016. Now, you all approved a lease and then voted to reconsider the proposed lease that was submitted November 19th. But I'm talking about what was the legal world on November 18th, okay? We had a valid lease that had a remainder until 2026. The county covenant with the restaurant, Captain's Barbecue, I may refer to it as restaurant sometimes, although I know it's, it has other things associated with it, but just for ease of reference. So we covenanted with them that we would give them a facility from which they could operate, and that they couldn't make investments in that facility to suit their delivery of services and in order to, earn revenue, make a profit, et cetera. We gave them what is commonly referred to, at least in commercial law, as peaceful possession and quiet enjoyment. If you've looked at real estate kind of documents, you'll see that phrase, and essentially it's a catch-all for meaning, look, we're not going to interfere as long as you comply. We're not going to interfere with what you're doing. We're not going to compromise the property rights that we have granted you. So that's the first point. The second point, after a number of years, and according to the staff report, I don't have personal knowledge, and I'll try to tell you when I have personal knowledge versus when I don't, that they have been, when I say they, the county and the restaurant have been struggling for about 5 years with the condition of the building, with it continuing to deteriorate, particularly to the point of questioning the structural integrity. Now, what I do have personal knowledge of was that that question was brought to me, and I'm going to say it was in October. I can't be really quite sure. Obviously, I can validate that through emails or my notes or some sort, about whether, there was this problem that we had and we need to restructure everything, and do we need to bid it? Do we need to go out to bid to look for alternative proposals? Someone had asked that question. So I looked at that issue. Okay, so this is where my personal knowledge comes in. So I did see a photograph, a number of photographs were given to me. The one that was most striking for me was a toilet that had collapsed through the floor. I inquired, I didn't know if it was a bathroom for the employees or a patron bathroom. I learned it was a patron bathroom. So as your legal representative, you might imagine that that would have given me far more concern or anxiety than otherwise, because there might have been some temporary things that could have been done with that situation. I also was informed that there were a number of repairs that were made that had failed. I was informed that going under the roof, they found dry rot. I went out to the property by myself, without a county representative or a restaurant representative. And I got on my hands and knees and got out there and tried to look under the portion of the original structure. The new deck was not built on grade. It was it was elevated off the ground. It was very clear to me, although I couldn't get under anything, but from my view, the structure was built on grade. There were no pilings. It was not elevated off the ground. So I had heard about these persistent problems, that there was a real question about the structural integrity of the floor, proven by the photographs and by the accounts made to me. So now, what does that represent? We as a landlord have an obligation to provide them a facility from which they can operate. So it was also represented to me that the current situation was not caused by the restaurant. There was nothing in the way that they administered or maintained the property that was contributing to the failure of the flooring. And that really was where my focus was. I know you've all received a report that talks about roofing and the wall cladding and so forth. Those were not issues presented to me, and really those were not issues unless they were telling me the roof was in danger of imminent collapse. Those would not be facts that would be that pertinent to me, because I know that the roofing and the wall cladding issues can be resolved with construction in place while there's use. Might be some inconvenience, but it could be done. But the structural integrity was very concerning. I informed the county administrator, and I don't know who else, probably some others, I mean, I'm sure I did, because there are a number of discussions that if we were to do anything that amounted to a cancellation of the lease, the county would be liable. I couldn't say how much, that's not something that I can know, but the potentiality is there that the restaurant could engage the county in a suit or just in a demand and claim that we were terminating the lease. They had 8 years remaining. I knew of my own knowledge that they were a successful operation, and I knew that that success was incrementally growing every year they were in operation. Now, that was not because I was privy to their books. It's not because I asked them questions about their revenue or their profits. It's that, as some of you, well, I think all of you know, I live in that area, and I very much use the resources of A1A for my recreation and for my health. I see Bing's every weekend. I'm there in some form. And I also knew from talking with people, and I could see it visibly, that Bing's was becoming more and more popular, more and more respected. You all know it's become a brand. It advertises, you know, it's in the top 10 in the country. I think that's based on Yelp reviews. I'm not sure, I don't use those services, but I know that that is what they advertise. I do know of my own knowledge. These are important things that I'm telling you of my own knowledge, because they undergird my legal opinions. That people tell me that's one of the when they have out-of-town company, that's where they take them. I do know from the resort properties that the resort properties advise guests, and I've seen that before, that they should go to Captain's Barbecue. So I knew that it was a business that had a rising trajectory of income. When there are those kinds of damages, forensic accountants are engaged as experts, and they take a look at all the data, and they project out what that revenue would have been. They project out what that net profit would have been. And that's always going to be subject to argument. Both sides have to get their own forensic accountants. Now, there's one other thing in the lease that is extremely important for the board to understand, and which commands my attention as your counsel. And that is, the lease includes a provision that if there's any litigation concerning the lease, the losing party is responsible for all the attorney's fees incurred by the winning party, including all of the experts that they may engage, including all of the paralegals, including all of the costs associated with the litigation, whether it is for mediation, trial, or appeal. So that is a very indeterminate liability when you're talking about a potential case. So in light of that situation, my opinion was that because of the potential exposure to an indeterminate amount of damages and potential for attorney's fees, that the county should not, could not terminate the lease. Now, let's look at that word terminate. There are a lot of ways that a tenant can claim a termination of a lease. It's not just that you declare, sorry, it's over, be out of here by 12 noon. If you take actions that interfere sufficiently enough with the operation of the business, they can claim that you have, in effect, terminated their property rights under that lease. Now, I'm not saying all these things will come to pass. I'm telling you what's in the mind of your counsel as the basis for my advice. Now, if there was a temporary suspension, say that there was a way analysis that the floor could be redone in phases maybe. I mean, I'm not sure. There's a lot of creative construction people out there and engineers. But if there was any sufficient interruption, I mean, not like a 1 week we're closed for repairs, but any kind of sufficient interruption and the potentiality of those damages exist, they're known in that world as business interruption damages. You've interrupted the conduct of the business, and you are liable for whatever they may lose in revenue and profit. Really, I mean the consequence of the loss of revenue, meaning the loss of profit. So, if the county were to avoid those indeterminate liabilities, by the way, the attorney fee provision would apply there if it were business interruption damages. Now, there's one other thing. If they were terminated or taken offline long enough, they could also theoretically, again, I'm looking at the universe of commercial law and damages. They could claim damage to their goodwill. Now, goodwill is a term of art. I mean, we all know what it means ordinarily. But in the economic world, it means the goodwill that you have built in your brand, in your name, in your service, in how customers view you. It has a dollar value, independent of your profit, because it represents really the size of the asset of your business. And goodwill is negotiated whenever there's, not all the time, but if there's substantial goodwill, when one company tries to buy another, et cetera, et cetera. Goodwill has a market value, again, determined by experts, and that could be another potential claim for damages. Okay, so the option of trying to repair it in place is fraught with these dollar exposures. If the restaurant was to be replaced, you have a duty under the law to mitigate the restaurant's damages. So that would mean that you need to give them an operating platform until there's a successor entity. Now, my own knowledge of the A1A corridor, particularly the areas, north of Beverly Beach to the Marineland, to the county line, I knew that there were not any ready-to-occupy buildings that had frontage on A1A that had already outfitted with all the things necessary to operate as a restaurant. And there's a lot of things you've got to do under the building and fire code in order to operate as a restaurant, because that could have been an option, but not for any kind of interim solution. Part of their goodwill, part of their revenue, and part of the profits they earn are because they are located in the park. And that was part of the RFP. This was an RFP that was put out in 2011. There was one other proposer, and that was the inducement for somebody to come in and bid on taking over something that had not been running successfully at all. There was a prior operation, as I think you all know, and it had failed. It was awarded a contract in 2009 through an RFP at that time, 2009. So if they were going to relocate, right, in order to minimize your exposure, and we're talking about the taxpayers, what the taxpayers would owe, what you would have to potentially pay, you would have to set up a situation where the restaurant could continue to operate so that their goodwill was not disturbed, so that their flow of revenue was the least impacted. Now, there's a statute that says, whenever you're going to lease county land, you've got to use an RFP, which we did. There's a provision that says, look, if you're going to extend the term, you need to do another RFP. Well, the law would not require, where you are facing these damages, where the tenant here, the restaurant, is not in default, it is not in default. There were no default. There are no default proceedings pending. There were none on November 18th. The law is not going to require you to go out and rebid. Because once you put out a rebid on the street, you know, that's the terminology of purchasing agents. To put the bid out on the street, you will have committed the first act that they could claim was a breach of the lease, because you have disturbed their peaceful possession and quiet enjoyment, threatening that they will lose their business. It would also be a very difficult thing. I don't know what a bidder on that hypothetical bidding would do. If the county awarded the bid because of the liability exposures, the bidder might say, look, you put me through a fruitless exercise, it cost me this amount of money or something, so there might be liabilities there. But I will tell you, that did not weigh on my opinion at all. I'm just trying to be complete with all the potential exposures. Now, the particular action you undertook, I'm going to use a couple of words here that you know. Legislative, quasi-judicial. This action was not either. Legislative is like, example, you enact an ordinance. Quasi-judicial, you're approving a land development PUD or subdivision or something of that sort, or a site plan. This is what's called an executive action. This is in your business capacity. This is the part of your responsibilities where you manage the business. So you are given great deal of latitude and discretion under the law to make those kinds of decisions. For instance, you don't need to provide any quasi-judicial exposures. There are no findings of fact in your rendition of an executive decision. Now, one final point. In the ordinance, excuse me, I didn't mean to say that. In the lease draft that you had for your November 19 meeting, in the staff report that you had for your November 19 meeting, the problems that I've just described about the condition of the building, the interruption of the building to be able to continue to operate, the problem with the structural integrity were in those documents, and specifically one of the findings within the lease document. So that is why you're considering what to do about that circumstance. In November 19, you're given the option, okay. Oh, by the way, let me make this point, because I saw some social media stuff's not accurate. The lease document is not drafted by Al Hadid. He is not clairvoyant. He doesn't know what the appropriate permutations and possibilities are for the business operating, what the different units of the government are doing. Our role, our legal department role, is to look at whatever the lease document is and make comments on it, make sure it's in proper legal form. So, for example, the amount of the lease, where the property is going, any timelines that are identified, those kinds of things would not be things that we would decide. However, we would make sure that the wording of the lease was legally and technically accurate, and then point out things that we saw that we thought were problematic. Okay, so if it wasn't me, what was it? Well, the restaurant and the county had very difficult issues to address. So they worked it through with a proposal. That's what the November 19 lease was. And that was to not interrupt the operation of the building, to allow them to operate at the site until a replacement site could be constructed and be operable on the property. They also made a number of other concessions. I'm not going to go over. Those are things that are going to be addressed by administration. But for instance, here's an example of an intersect between their discussions about what they ought to do and what legal, and legal sometimes does that on leases. What? the intersect of those. So they were willing, the restaurant was willing, because the county did not have sufficient funds available, and given the dilemma, that they would pay for a new structure. And that in return for that, they would get additional time on the lease to recover their investment, and the building would be the county's. So when I examine the lease, I'm looking at that provision. When is it going to become the county's? So you'll see language in the lease that says upon the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. So that's an indication of what our role is, tightening that up. The insurance provisions, we looked at those and made sure those were adequate to protect our interests. So those are the kinds of things that we do. So now I've teed it up for you. Obviously this is not an easy handoff. I'm not claiming it is. That you have to figure out what to do in this situation. I know the administrator has prepared a PowerPoint that he has forwarded to you. And unless there are any questions, I'm at end.
I do. Who wrote this lease?
I'm assuming that administration and the restaurant worked together to write the lease.
Who wrote it on the county side? Who looked over it and reviewed it on the county side? Who represented the county?
It would have been myself, Heidi Petito would have commented on it, and also we were dealing with obviously the restaurant.
And as chairman, I reviewed it also.
And chairman reviewed it after to make some final tweaks.
So we didn't have a legal group that's used to doing leases write it and look over it.
We have probably 50 or more different leases that we lease property as a county, and they're all follow templates or other things, and they're all reviewed by legal. But legal doesn't write the deal points. I think that's what Mr. Hadid was trying to talk about. Typically, the deal points comes from the department. So when we lease property at the airport, we have a standard lease, but then we plug in deal points from the department, and those all get reviewed. And then and generally, they're worked out with the tenant that we're doing the lease with.
If I can, Mr. Mullins, you just triggered, you just triggered something that I specifically recall. In the 2011 lease, the first one, and the 2018 lease that was presented in November, there's a very long paragraph which I composed, which was replicated verbatim from the 2011 lease. In the 2011 lease, just for reference, this isn't for you necessarily to look up, but for people who want to look at that stuff, it's in section 2 of the 2011 lease, and it's in section 6 of the 2018 lease. And that is, when they were going to lease initially, it was my responsibility as counsel to recognize and to ensure that the principles for which the county acquired the park were reflected as part of the operating context of the business. And I'm not going to be able to recite it exactly, but it starts off with the lessee, acknowledges that this is a property acquired under the environmentally sensitive lands, that it is maintained for public recreation, that it is, has a National Historic Site on the property, that it is part of the National Scenic Byway, part of the Malacompra Greenway. I don't remember all the different things I said in there, but I identified all of the attributes of the property that are peculiar to the property, unique to the property, and stated that the restaurant must operate in deference, the business must operate in deference to those principles. And that is something, for instance, where I added more than just win the certificate of occupancy. That's a little bit more of a contribution. And as I said, when I got the draft of the 2018 lease, it's one of the things I looked for. They knew that I would want that, and they put it in there verbatim as I had stated it in the 2011. So that's another example.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yeah, just one quick, since Mr. Hadid brought up the bathroom. Just wanted clarification on this. I've been at the restaurant. I was at the restaurant yesterday. It looks like the bathroom was fixed and is in good working order now, clean, well lighted. So when that was done, who paid for that? And was the inspector involved with saying it is now approved? And if that could be done, could similar types of improvements be done to the restaurant?
And we're going to hit upon that, but that was repaired by county staff at taxpayer cost. And we had to do after hours, overtime, stuff like that. Heidi's here to talk about that, and we've got the engineer to come up and talk about that. Those kind of things have happened on an interim basis, but they're repetitive and repeatedly occurring. And that's been the nature of the whole issue here, and we're gonna talk about that in detail.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, you guys ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What I want to do is kind of just walk you through the Bing's Landing as far as all the different issues involved and kind of lay all those out because they've all been expressed as different concerns that I've heard. Bing's Landing, the entire property consists of 3 different parcels. Parcel B was the first acquired parcel in 1989. C was acquired in 2000, and A was acquired in 2009. This is kind of how it works, and A and B was acquired with environmentally sensitive lands. And environmentally sensitive lands doesn't mean that you hold them and you can't do anything with them. They could be recreation, recharge, a lot of different things, and we'll talk about that. So the Captain's Barbecue site, some people were talking about the size of the building, and I know if you talk about the parking lot and other things. This total site is 14.75 acres, and the barbecue site, as it sits today, is about 0.12 acres, or 0.8% of the overall park site. Originally, the parcel that it sits on today was proposed to be going to. It was part of an original ESL bond resolution, and this is what it said back then, which allowed for parks, recharge areas, and also for other purposes appertuit, necessary or incidental thereto. And we've had leases at many of our facilities, whether they be for kayaks or special events or other things, bait, et cetera, restaurants, et cetera, of ESL. In 2009, we updated our manual, and I put the whole manual on there. It was quite an extensive process. And what we really wanted to do is flush out all the different things of ESL. Instead of just relying on a small bond resolution, we wanted to be able to explain how we're going to pursue acquiring property, how we will use property. And I think E and F are related to Captain's Barbecue and how we'd view that today. And I'll say, let me go back to Dead Lake for a little bit. Dead Lake, we have the Bull Creek Restaurant there. That was acquired. There was a restaurant and campground there, and that's what we went back with, the restaurant and campground. And that's been there ever since. But we acquired that in 2007, late 2007.
Mr. Coffey, I do hate to jump in here with you, but
Yeah.
I was here when the Bing's property was acquired, and I worked on it quite extensively as the county took it over and had to substantially remediate the property. I just want to make some things very clear because I've seen a lot of, not intentional misinformation, but just to clarify to the board. The purpose of the acquisition in 1989 was to acquire a point of intercoastal waterway access for the public, because that's what it had been used for, although maybe there were charges and so forth by the prior property owners. And there was the threat, and I don't mean that, it didn't sound right, there was a talk by the heirs that they would sell the property for development, and then it would no longer, be available for any kind of public use. This was I'm not going to say it was the only marina, that's not accurate, but it was the only marina that provided the degree of public access to the intercoastal waterway that we had in the length of Flagler County. So that's what it was bought for. Let me tell you what it was not bought for. It was not bought for habitat conservation, okay? The Princess Place Corridor was bought for habitat conservation. The River to Sea Preserve was bought for habitat conservation. The islands in the middle of the Intercoastal Waterway across from Marineland, they were bought for habitat conservation. It was not bought for the preservation of historic resources. At the time it was bought, there was not any understanding by the county that there were significant historical resources on the property. The way that came to light, actually, is that while the Road and Bridge Department was out there clearing the clutter, clearing a very substantial amount of clutter, I'm not going to describe it here, the Road and Bridge Superintendent, Benji Colley, noticed some cut coquina out of the ground, summoned us over there, and we told him to rope off a very large area and took out all of the equipment that was then operating on other parts of the property. So then we very carefully removed things so as not to interfere. We retained an archaeologist, we got a state historic preservation grant, and we discovered the degree of the historical resources. So it was not bought for that purpose. It was bought for the purpose of public recreation. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure, because that might correct it in a number of people's minds and perhaps in your own minds in terms of what you've been reading.
The next one I'll talk about is what has been talked about a little bit, and that's the FCT grant for the Bings South parcel, and that was shown as parcel C a little while ago. And the reason this is relevant is two issues. One is parking, and the other is potentially as a site location for Captain's Barbecue as an alternate site location. And the reason I say that this is very similar to what we're doing with Bay Drive Park. Bay Drive Park, we got 2.3 million. We had to put in an application and we got scored based on all the things we were gonna do in Bay Drive Park. Such was the process back then in 2000. And when we got the grant, we had to agree to do all these things as part of the grant. Now, this was our master plan. The master plan had parking, had loops and all that. We've completed the majority of all those things except for parking. This is the parking statement in it. I won't spend a lot of time on it. In 2012, we got that removed. And it used to be when you got these grants, they were they were sticklers for you following all those rules. But as time went along, the Great Recession, they started softening their approach, and they basically said, we'll let you out of that, but you can retain that choice to add parking in the future. And the only reason I say that, it's gone back and forth of, no, it's not required, or it never was required. It was always required to have 21 spaces. It got removed in 2012. We have a parking issue, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But also, if we go back to the original list here, there is no thing that says a bait shop or a restaurant facility, and that would require a change to the master plan, and that would require a change in approval by FDEP.
For parcels.
For parcel C, yes, sir, for parcel C only.
And let me come in here. You notice at the very top, FCT grant. That was the financial source for the South property. And with it, Florida Communities Trust is what that stands for.
Sorry, yep.
No, it's all right. Numerous requirements, one of them being what you're seeing here, the management plan. That was because we used state money, FCT money, to buy the South parcel. The main parcel, where the restaurant sits, where the marina is, was 100% county money from the bond issue.
In the north
There
parcel.
There were no, well, I'm just talking about the restaurant parcel. I mean, that's true. That's true for the north parcel too. But the implication is important because there were no state or federal funds involved. The county was not required to have a management plan, and there is no management plan presently existing relative to the main portion of Bings.
Okay. All right, the history of Bings, and Al talked about a lot of stuff we cleaned up and a lot of stuff that's changed. There was a motel there was dog kennels, bathhouse. The ramp actually area was somewhere in here, they tell me, or right here, sorry. You can see it on there. And there was gas tanks there and other stuff that the county cleaned up and tore down. And that was part when we discovered the archaeological issues, is when we were cleaning all that out. But they had rental boats, motor boats, bait, gas, oil, et cetera, all the kind of things. And a snack bar you see down below, hot sandwiches, drinks, and you'll see that in the sewer permit, septic tank permit as we go along. So the use of that building's been a bar, been a fish camp store, restaurant, bait store, and community center. And it was a restaurant back then, back in the day, and of course it is today. History of the building. The original construction date, we do not know. The report, I know that he's going to come up and correct some of that. And on the tax parcel data, it only indicates when we acquired it. It's not necessarily when we believe it was anywhere between the 50s to 70s vintage. We don't know exactly, but it predates most of your building codes. It's not built to code, and it was assigned no value at the time when we acquired it because of the age and condition of the building. It was just in such poor, dilapidated condition. Now, we repaired it some in-house, but I guarantee it wasn't some repairs like you would do today. Now I'm going to talk about the structure of the building, and what you see there is a picture, and Mike Navarra, if you could come on up, please, Mike. Mike is the engineer from Universal Engineering, and he's amended his report. We will put that online right after, because if we do it now, it'll disrupt people that have tapped into the online resource. Come on up here, Michael. And so we're going to pull up his latest report, but and we have Heidi Petito here. Mike Dixon is a general contractor. He is your assistant general services director. He is sick today. Heidi's going to be pinch hitting. She's got his notes and some of the repairs he did. She's also got the work order system and repairs that we've done over time. And these are outside of anything the owner has done. Mike, excuse me.
Thank you for,
I don't see the green light. Oh.
is that better? Yeah. It's working, okay. We had prepared this report, it was kind of short notice, it was during Christmas time, but we got there. A lot of this report is limited because of access issues and non-destructive testing. As we got through the building, we start from the roof down and work our way through the building. And this is just a brief description of what we look for and the limitations we have on it. You want to go to the next page? I can't.
Can you scroll up a little bit?
Yeah. And let's get to the.
Bigger?
Yeah.
Plus sign down as well.
There you go. Now we start with the roofing section. Now that works. The roofing section is asphalt shingles on the roof. The original installation, we have no clue when it was put on. We know that patches have been done. You can see them in photos 28 through 54. Several areas have been patched, but the roof is in need of full replacement. There's an aluminum roof over the screen enclosure that was put on, I think, in 2000, somewhere in the 2000s. That is even showing, point of its past its useful life. If you want to go down the foundation, that's the top part. The foundation, the structure was not visible. We cannot get down to where the footings are and tell what they are. Typically, on a stem wall construction, it would have a footer, and then the stem wall will come up above it. Inside that, it has a wood floor system that's been constructed, and I think that's where the questions are. That wood floor system is slightly elevated above a slab, and the slab is located below grade. So every time it rains outside, the water comes in and fills that depression. In our inspection, we were able to see where termite damage and rot is coming up through that wood floor system and starting to rot it out. You can also see areas that have been repaired. You can see areas that probably are right in need of repair. You can see water damage right now on them, where there's the water outline where water's getting in there and starting to eat it up. The only way, and talk about the only way to fix this is to remove that wood floor system, get in there, put a sump pump in there, and then rebuild the complete wood floor system. The exterior walls are the same thing. I know, that everyone's focused on the foundation, but the exterior walls, if you look at the areas of rot, it's coming from the bottom up. You know, a lot of buildings, when you get the roof leaks, you'll start seeing the rot come down. This is rotting from the bottom up. The photos in here will show where the rot's coming up. So to do a detailed report, we would need to get in there and do destructive testing. The problem with that is, we have to shut the restaurant down. We can't go in there and lift up boards and have the restaurant running while we're doing this. That's where our limitation was. If you go into if you keep going down there, it's covered with a siding which is made of OSB. It's a siding that was popular in the 80s, but the faults of it are well known, and there's class action lawsuits against the siding. The siding itself tends to, once it was cut or once it gets a crack in it, it holds moisture. OSB, you know, you see OSB roofing on houses now, the OSB sheathing. It is an acceptable material as long as it's covered. You put it on a roof, you tar paper, you put shingles on it, it stays, it's fine. The problem is in a situation like this where it's used as a siding, it's exposed. Anytime you don't paint it, anytime it gets a crack in it, anytime someone damages it, you start letting water in and it starts completely failing. Back to the roof. So the roof system, wood truss system, plywood decking, there's a lot of areas on that roof system where we could see moisture damage. Moisture is starting to come through this building, and the only way to repair that, it needs a complete roof. Going in there and patching a spot here and there is not going to keep. It seems like from our account on the inspection, that is what has been done to this building over the years, is someone's gone in and it's just putting a Band-Aid over that spot. No one's gone in there and fixed the issues. You know, the way to properly do it is go in there and fix the issues. The problem with that is once you decide you're going to go in there and completely fix the issues on the building, you have to bring the building up to code. And that's where I think you're going to have a big issue because of the code. 1950s, it wasn't built to code. Now you have to get into the foundations, the strapping, the tie down, meeting the 140 mile an hour wind, 139 mile an hour wind load, and having that building comply with that. Having the HVA system brought up to comply with the Florida Energy Code, plumbing system, the electrical system, everything would have to be completely updated to the new code.
And just so you know, we've dealt with this a number of times after the hurricane. The threshold is 50% of the building value, your improvements compared to 50% of the value. And Commissioner O'Brien, I see him shaking his head from the insurance side, knows exactly what I'm talking about.
The electrical system has been upgraded. We did find permits on that. There's still areas, right now it's a single strand wire system, which the insurance companies don't like to cover. So if you get into that, you pretty much have to rewire the whole building. That's, you know, exterior elements. The grade parking lot we got into, the handicap accessibility doesn't have the slopes. There's a lot of things that, because it's been in occupancy and it's been working, is allowed to remain. But once you stop and decide we're going to do complete repairs, all that has to be brought up to the current code.
And you'll see as we get into the considerations that staff had of the route we presented to you of why we did that. And these are documenting what staff was trying to say we were already dealing with on an ad hoc basis, Band-Aid basis, without getting into a complete upgrade of the building, which obviously a complete rebuild is a different issue altogether. Mike, are you done? Yeah. Okay. Heidi, do you want to add anything to that?
Heidi Petito, General Services Director. Just to talk a little bit about some of the issues, and I know Al Hadid had mentioned when the county had purchased the building, it was in bad condition based on the age and the condition of the property when the county acquired it. It didn't add any value to the property. The county at the time did go in, though, prior to me being on staff. The Road and Bridge Department had gone in and done some renovations to it. I had found the old appraisal from the property back in '89 where they had gone in and done some minor repairs to it. The intent was to rent it out as a bait shop and potentially a concessionaire restaurant type business. At the time, the county went in and made some, like I said, minor renovations. You do have a portion of the building that is slab on grade on the south side of the property. The north side of the property, a portion of it is below grade. So the county went in there and they put in some floor joists and some tongue and groove plywood, subfloor, and some plywood on top of that with VCT flooring. The building sat unused for many years. There wasn't a problem with water intrusion. Even though they advertised for a concessionaire, nobody came forward. Back in 2011, when the county put it out for bid, we did go out. We had two bids. Captain's Barbecue was awarded the contract to run the facility. We did go back with plans provided by a local architect. The county's general services undertook the renovation of the facility. At that time, as part of the renovations, we did go in, remove the old floor system. We applied a sealer to the concrete slab and the block stem walls in the dining and kitchen area. We installed a new floor system during that demolition and the construction process. The moisture was not present at the time when we removed the materials. It showed no signs of wood rot in what we removed. However, we went back with engineered wood floor trusses, 3/4-inch tongue and groove, sturdy floor, which was like a treated waxed OSB subfloor, and then engineered. It's basically like a subfloor wood product, and then a 1/2-inch pressure-treated plywood, and then we went over it with ceramic floor tiles. It took about 4 years that Captain's Barbecue was in there that we started getting contacted about some loose floor tiles around the north side door threshold leading out to the deck area. So that was about July of 2015. It wasn't a lot of work. It was maybe about 17 hours on staff. And again, that was 4 years after they were in there. We addressed it as a standalone problem, replacing just a small cutout of plywood and reattaching some of those floor tiles. But then we were contacted about a year later, in the span of January through June of 2016, where we spent about 180 hours, where we were called back into the kitchen area, which was around the double sink, and a floor drain, where there's a floor drain that was located, and we repaired it in the same way, believing that the issue was from possibly water splashing on the floor from either the sink or potentially maybe mopping. But then, again, we handled it the same way, thinking that it was just an isolated issue. But then it started to become larger, where it happened in the middle of the dining room floor. And when we started to remove some loose tiles, we found that the 1/2-inch plywood started to crumble. We started having some sagging spots. Excuse me. Once we removed that subfloor and we found moisture damage in 4 of the engineered floor trusses, we removed the damaged wood and we scabbed some of the pressure-treated 2x12s, replaced that subflooring.
I think that's what you're seeing some in the picture, too. You're seeing some scabbing of Joyce's floor.
And this is actually the bathroom, which was more recent. This was in September of 2018. But, we've gone in, we've installed some air vents to the exterior block stem walls. And again, a lot of the stuff that we did was in the after hours, where we had crews go in there working 16 hours at a time, trying not to impact the restaurant. And again, we spent we were spending a lot of time in October of 2016 prior to Hurricane Matthew coming on board in Florida. We actually had scheduled a major repair where we had worked it out with Captain's. They were going to shut down for about a week. Well, then Hurricane Matthew hit, so unfortunately we weren't able to go back in there. But during that span of that year, we had spent about 178 hours. So unfortunately, we weren't able to get back in there after Matthew. Captain's actually employed a contractor to proceed with some of those floor repairs. And again, September 2018, which is the most recent, where we had to renovate one of those ADA restrooms because the floor gave way and one of the toilets was sagging. Again, we've spent a total of about 435 hours going in there, not knowing, because it does predate any Florida building code or any records that we have on file. The only way really that we felt to fix this would be to shut down the facility. We'd have to go in there, remove any of the floor structures, and bring it up to make it slab on grade. We'd have to go in there and fill that void with soil and then pour a concrete slab, or remove the existing soil from around the building. But really not knowing how it was originally constructed and how the stem walls were constructed, it would really preclude us from doing that because we don't know if the concrete, by pouring the concrete, if it would blow out those stem walls. And then, looking at the exterior of the building, if we were to remove some of that existing soil and tamper it down away from the building, you're going to impact trees, you're going to impact existing sidewalks and stuff like that. So really, it would be better to fill the floor, but not knowing, again, what the walls are constructed and how that would be, we're not sure that it would withstand that pressure, so.
So this kind of factored in, and you can ask any questions you right now about building condition, or we can come back to this, but I want to go through and walk you through all the different components.
I would like to ask a few questions on it being in the remodeling and doing renovations and stuff. I'm very familiar with that siding and know it's an issue. Is there any issue? A lot of the resolutions that we do to deal with that and address with it is putting vinyl siding on it, which is a very inexpensive way. Is there any issue that can't be done over there?
I believe if, you'd have to open up the areas and find out where the wood rot is. And I think once you started opening those areas, that's the problem with our limitation is we'd like to take some off. I think you're gonna find more and more rotted studs, structural studs in there that are rotted. And then you could do the vinyl siding and
So the vinyl would seal it, it would protect it?
It would encapsulate,
It also would cover up some of the bad wood, so you wouldn't have to replace all of it. That's what we've done in the past. Is there any reason that that can't be done?
Right, but it has to be structurally sound before I
Right.
did that. So that would be, my first thing would be you'd have to remove those areas that are really showing rot and then see what's going on. My fear is once you started doing that, you're gonna get into a beehive. You're just gonna keep going around that building.
Correct, and that's part of the roof is fixable. We can obviously put a new roof on it. We could fix the siding, as you mentioned, Commissioner Mullins. But between you getting on the floor, into the walls, into the termite issues, into fixing the drainage, it's a never-ending thing. Once you hit the 50% threshold, you're into a new building. You gotta bring everything up to code. So it doesn't matter if it's, if you can fix some of those items, you trigger that threshold, then you get into the new building issue.
All right, the rot from the bottom that you say is coming up, is that water, is that some of the water that's flowing down that way?
It's from, probably from rainfall. That slab they have in there is below the elevation of the outside of the building. That's
Okay.
where they were talking about you'd have to dig out. So you would have to, the only way I could see is you'd have to create drainage in there and put some pump in there. But to do this all, you have to take the floor system
And now the
out.
water's coming from, it's just running to it. It's not coming up from below the ground.
With rain, it probably is coming from below the ground and then coming from side of the building into there.
Because is there any reason you can't create a berm or do something to reflow the water?
I don't think that's where you'd have to get into. You have to dig down and find out what the foundation, I think it's going right through that foundation. It's, as it's raining, the water's draining into the ground, going through the foundation into there.
And-
So a berm's gonna get the groundwater away from it, but it's not gonna get that soaking water away from it.
And Commissioner, both hurricane events, we had water, obviously the intercoastal is much higher. Water came over the dock area, the Marina Basin area, and actually flowed back into the restaurant area, back from the waterway area for extended periods of time. So you had it sitting in water extended periods of time for the understory. It didn't get into the restaurant, but because the restaurant's a little elevated, but it was all the understory components were soaking in water at least two different occasions, probably for more than a week at a time, both events.
All right, and one other question I have with the structural, I'm not familiar with the I've seen the building, but I haven't paid close enough attention. Is there gutters around it to help with the water? There's not? Okay, so gutters could help. But now, understanding anything we do with that building, moving it, going into a new building, it could impact the trees around there. Is that, I guess that's what
Yes,
you
sir.
said?
Yes, sir.
So any
Especially if
disturbance-
we go into a rebuild on site. One of the trees, for example, goes right through the deck area, and probably addressing all that and putting it to proper code, proper foundations and all that will definitely impact the tree roots and the trees themselves.
Mr. Chairman, I had one more question, just to follow up on the bathroom. The reason I brought that up again was at our previous meeting, there was some concern that if the building is in such bad condition with the bathroom and all that, at some point, it may be uninhabitable or cannot be used as a restaurant
That's
for
correct.
coding reasons. So where are we in that process? Are we, I
Well-
mean, it's going to have to stay there another couple of years, no matter what we do.
Well, no, the approach was that we would be able to construct the restaurant within 6 months to a year, the new restaurant location, and that we would tear it down, we would Band-Aid it, just like we have been in the meantime, and try and monitor it as closely. But, and you'll see as we get into some of these details, our approach wasn't that we would want to keep banding or keep leaving with a building that's not the code for years on end, but we could manage it another 6 months to a year if we had to.
Well, how do approvals work on something like that? Does it get approved each year for use?
You talking about from the building department?
Yeah.
No, we work closely with the building department. Like if we did the additions on, all those additions had to be up to code. But just repairs and stuff, we're allowed to repair and maintain the building. And generally, we work with them, we brought them in, but there's going to be a cumulative effect that the building official could say, okay, you reach your cumulative effect now, you need to be building a new building. And that's where we knew we were heading towards. So if I can, that was kind of our, again, part of our considerations into, he talked to you about business interference, or business interruption and business loss. And those are some of the details that we didn't really talk about before because we didn't need to, because we were talking about a new location. So now we're going back and talking about all the problems and all the considerations that went into that decision process.
Before a new location was considered, was an evaluation or was any kind of inspection done like this prior? Or is this the first one?
Well, this is the first outside independent engineering inspection. We use Universal quite a bit for a lot of different things. In fact, we're using them acquiring the tax collector's building there. We generally, we consider their opinions and their thoroughness very well. But we have Mike Dixon, and we deal with a lot of buildings that we maintain. Again, we maintain over 1 million square feet of building. Mike's the general contractor, so we relied a lot on staff and the general contractors they brought in, but we didn't go out and do an independent engineering analysis. And again, we didn't do that to tell us what we kind of already knew. I mean, the things that Mike's telling us today, he's confirming what we already knew as staff over the years dealing with the problem, and the owners know.
And some of the staff that we had working on this over the years now work in your building department as building inspectors. So they're familiar with this.
So this stuff was noted before, there's some documentation noting these issues before
We
this
didn't
was
do a
done?
formal engineering
Not a
report
formal
or something like
engineering
that.
report,
We
but
would-
just over through our work order system and some of the staff that I've had that have worked on this over the last few years. I'd
Correct.
say it's really triggered since Hurricane Matthew or leading up to I'd say major rain events since Matthew, Irma, and significant rain impacts that we've had over the last few years.
Last 2 years have been extremely wet, as you can imagine, but this is not a trick of staff to justify a new location. This is something we've been dealing with. Have we put it on the front page? Have we done a formal report? No, we haven't done a formal report. We haven't gone up and said, hey, the toilet fell through the floor, let's put it in the paper. We have not done anything like that. We've just tried to work with the owner. Some repairs that we were geared up to do, the owner took on at his expense through a contractor of his own. Others we took on, but you could see through the work order system, the hours are increasing every year more and more. And we're getting to the point, Commissioner Mullins, when you start having a problem, you try and fix it, you try and fix it, you try and fix it, but eventually, if you keep doing the same thing over again, you're asking for trouble, probably from a legal standpoint for an extended shutdown, or for someone to get hurt on the property, or some kind of catastrophic failure.
Just to check on where we're at 10:05 or so, can we get the presentation side done, you think,
Yes.
by 10:30, so we leave enough time for?
I think so, sir.
Okay.
Okay,
Is that
so I'm going to walk you through the different issues that have been raised and just try and give you the best information we can. Now, this is a survey we've done of the restaurant, and there's been a lot of discussion of how big a restaurant it is and how big an area they occupy and what's in the lease. And actually online, we put the latest lease document, I think was 4,000 something. We'll talk about that. But there's outside areas that are here, and there's outside areas here, and this is a split rail fence. and there's a big cooker right here, but there's wood and different things in some of these outside areas. So when you add all that up, and the water, just to orientate everybody, the water is right here. Okay. And this, so I'm gonna flip down. Okay, now I'm gonna flip it. Now the water is here. I'm gonna go back and forth. This deck right here is the same deck, and here's the Marina Basin. And what this is this is a drawing of the tax collector's website. The only thing that's different is we added these two outside areas, and I think they were conservative of what we've shown. But if you add up all those square footages, we're at 5706 is total square footage. Okay? Keep that in mind because our lease says 5,200. Archaeological issues. We plan to retain Greg Smith, the archaeologist. He spoke, I believe, to a group here recently, and he's also very familiar with the site. He previously worked on the Bing site. Don't know the full cost because it's going to depend on what final layout, final location. And if artifacts are found, the way it works is you'll preserve them, and you can potentially, if they're displayable, display them, depending if they're charged or whatnot. There are lots of other things. Obviously, it was a RV park for many years, so there's lots of plastics and other stuff mixed into the soil. And monitoring, the way it works with archaeological issues, it's actually monitored during the construction process. That's just normal, everyday stuff. Water, it's the City of Palm Coast Water, separately metered now. We propose a separate meter for any new facility and expected minimal change in uses. So right now, they operate all their stuff in containers, and all that stuff gets thrown away, essentially. So you aren't doing dishes and stuff like that that's entering your septic field system, and it's not, obviously not water. In the new plan, he has talked about having some glassware and some dinner tableware, and for special occasions or a limited time. So that would increase the water usage slightly, but it's not proposed to go to be a full-scale restaurant with full-scale water usage. When you get to the sewer side, you either have a plan A or plan B. There's no in between. Even though there'll be larger amounts, we'll have to design for large amounts. We don't expect large amounts of discharge. It's a little hard to see, but let me orientate everybody. This is the Malacompra historic, I'll call it pavilion, with the Joseph Hernandez dig site. This is the existing building. The existing drain field's here. The existing drain field was built in 1991. It's combined, meaning the whole park is on the one system. It's older, and it has some tree issues. You can imagine as the trees have grown up, during drought periods, they seek out water. It's 1,600 square feet, and it's designed for a 3,100 gallon per day flow. County had always talked about replacing it. It was always in our plans because of the age. You're approaching 30 years. The flow is about right, but once it gets impaired or something else, and it was permitted for a 3-bedroom house at 450 gallons per day, 130 park attendees at 5 gallons per day, and at the time there was a restaurant on site for 80 seats at 25 gallons per day. Now, the gallonage per day for restaurant, there's two categories. There's 25 gallons per day for more like a carry-out or light with no real dishes. If you get into dishes or anything else, you can go up to 40 gallons per seat per day. Okay, that standard has changed slightly. The 3-bedroom house, as we talked about demolishing that, and the 130 park attendees is what they would hold us to today. In the future, we have a proposed upgrade regardless. I talked about that before. So no matter what we wanted to do, even though we're at 3,100 gallons per day or 1,600 square feet, we'd want to build a bigger drain field to better handle everything we're dealing with, and to be environmentally sound. So to go to the next level, those are the estimated costs we have at this time from a vendor we use for most of our septic tank fields. These dollar amounts aren't in our budget. These dollar amounts we agreed to because we felt they were overall park and stuff we need to address, and it's the right thing to do. We are looking into temporarily connecting the Hammock Dunes CDD wastewater system. They have not approved that. We just had a discussion with them. But that would be, we estimate about $90,000 plus ongoing bills. The ongoing bills we'd be able to charge to the restaurant based on their water usage. And that would not require a drain field, it would require an E1 system that we would pump over to the Hammock Dune system. And there are some things. This thing would be better for us and better for everyone because it would minimize any tree damage. Environmentally, it would be better than having a septic system. Although short term, it's a little bit more expensive. There would be savings compared to the 7,500 square foot drain field. And reliability, it would be a better overall system and reuse, et cetera, et cetera. If we put a new drain field in, this is the caretaker's residence, this is the entrance off of A1A. We would propose to place it up in this area, and then there's a strip along here on the other side of the fence where we'd minimize tree damage. And so you'd have 3750 and 3750 is what I'm showing you approximate locations. So we would work with the health department and try and map that out to minimize tree damage. Solid waste. Captain's Barbecue has a dumpster. Captain's Barbecue pays for that dumpster. Flagler County has a dumpster. They're required to, as part of our solid waste contract, required to take care of that solid waste for us for free as part of our contract. We have no known solid waste issues. Does that mean anyone ever leaves trash out in the park, whether they bring it in or it's from Captain's? I guess occasionally, but we police it up. Both dumpsters are proposed to be screened in the new agreement, and currently they are not screened. The dumpster size and our pickups can be increased. So let's say trash does increase. You can either increase your dumpster size or the frequency of pickups. Alcohol beverage. Currently there's beer and wine there daily. And it's also allowed for private events, and obviously we don't check boats and stuff like that. I'm sure there's stuff in coolers, whether that's alcohol, primarily probably beer and wine, I would guess. Additionally, this additional seating, what that does for the restaurant is it lowers the cost of obtaining an alcohol and beverage permit. That was part of the negotiations, part of something they wanted, specifically to offset the increased cost of relocating, the costs they expect. And so if you have over 150 and you serve a certain amount of food, obviously it becomes a much cheaper permit. Now, does that mean it's going to be, everything's going to blow up there, everything's going to be 150 seats full all the time? No. Your lunch crowd, your breakfast crowd are still going to be your breakfast crowd, still going to be your lunch crowd. You could add 500 seats, but you will only have so many customers at any one time. Now, that doesn't mean those peak events, you could fill every seat in those peak events. I'm not saying that you won't fill every seat occasionally, but even then, commissioners, as you know, when you go to a restaurant and you take a booth of 4 and it's just you and your wife, then it's not filling every seat in that restaurant. That's just the way, obviously, restaurants work. We've had no alcohol-related incidents that we know of. Service restricted to after 5 p.m. Monday through Thursday for the alcohol, not for the beer and wine, but for the alcohol. They agreed to that. Parking. We believe there is a parking problem now. Our goal was to add at least 30 parking spaces. Our goal was to minimize tree loss and damage. We have been working on some draft plans. There's nothing planned, settled, or determined. And as always, there's multiple solutions. So if we are able, for example, to move the sewage over to Hammock Dunes and pipe it over to there, that might free a parking lot area there where the current house is and it's already disturbed and it's tucked off to the side. We could restructure some of the parking that's there now. I know to the south of the current restaurant, there's 7 tucked in around trees. As always, what staff does with these things, and you can see it in that parking lot there, it's shell. We construct it in-house. We still got to make sure it's safe, so sometimes that does involve a tree removal. But we field finalize around trees. If you've been to the parking lot, if you had a chance to go this weekend or some other time, there are cars scattered all around. Now, we got to make sure the trees aren't going to fall on a vehicle. We got to make sure liability issues and all that kind of stuff. But generally, when we build those things, we definitely work around the trees. Lease. Let's talk about the lease. So we had an RFP in 2011. September 1st was our initial lease, the kickoff date. The First Amendment was 2015, 2016. All of these issues went to the Board of County Commissioners. 2011 RFP was a little controversial because the other vendor was there, and there was a discussion about what is an RFP. They proposed a restaurant. I would have proposed a restaurant. But 2011, the lease, the amendment, the Second Amendment, all went through Board of County Commissioners ratifying the restaurant being there. No problems, no opposition, and it's not required to be a public hearing. You're not required to provide notice. This is a business transaction for you guys, and it's the same, no different for your airport leases. We put those airport leases, and so we put all those airport leases. And this lease on the 18th of this year was handled the same way we handled all the other leases that we presented to you. So there's nothing nefarious about the way we went to that. Approach the leasee to the lease. So we approached the lease as a settled issue, that it was viewed as a positive thing being in our park. We didn't view it as a controversial, should we have a restaurant in our park or not. To us, we avoided the ongoing structural issues with the current structure. What we did is we basically, we didn't get into all those issues, and we didn't present all those issues in the staff report because we didn't have to deal with them with a new location. We desired to avoid the shutdown or a county lease violation as the owner. And you've heard a lot about that. And you've also heard about the county attorney's opinion about business interruption and some of the liabilities we have. Also, we have liabilities of slip and fall. We have liabilities of maintenance. So if we're paying overtime and stuff like that, with the new lease, approach to the lease, we wanted to avoid all those issues. We wanted to avoid this liability as much as possible, even though we're the owner, we'll always get drug into those. We wanted to distance ourselves from that and also the maintenance. We thought it would be good to get an upgraded structure. So let's say we go fix everything. If we keep it on the current slab and, you know, the current elevation is now, the next hurricane could bring all that water and structural damage back underneath. And we were excited about the additional investment in our public facility. We viewed it as a waterfront use, economic development, and lastly, we wanted to consider the environmental issues as far as the septic system, trees, et cetera. We wanted to minimize any taxpayer cost, and we wanted to minimize the impacts to the park. So here's the major lease terms. 8 years remaining with mutual option for 5 years, 13 years total, although the 5 years are by mutual consent, so they may not get those. Current rent is $780. It goes to $820 in 2019. It was for a restaurant bait shop. They were entitled to do kayaks and bikes. The space in the last lease amendment is 4,490 square feet is listed in there. The total footprint, as I showed you above, and showed on the property, the survey and the tax, and the property appraiser's website is excess of 5,600. Right now, it's a county building. It's county maintained, county insured. Although the owner has stepped up and done a lot of stuff, the reality is that those are our responsibilities. I wanted to mention two other areas. The outdoor area, in the lease that carried all the way through the former lease, the leasee shall be permitted to have a barbecue cooker, firewood, and other related outdoors and on the leased premises as shown in Exhibit A. So they were allowed to have certain things outside their footprint. And it also later on mentioned kayaks and bikes, which we never got into, but obviously that would have required additional outside areas and required to be screening. On-site dining. A lot was made about carryout, and basically this outdoor area dwarfs right into this on-site dining. It says what shall be used to produce and sell carryout food from the building. A lot of people say, oh, you can only do carryout. That was the original lease. No, it said for consumption on the leased premises elsewhere within the park or off the park property. And the reason the term carryout was used is because they weren't going to use dishes. And that was partly at our request and working with them because of the septic system. We didn't want to put all that pressure on our septic system. So everything is disposable, but everything was clearly designed to eat there on the property and elsewhere in the park. So let's talk about the current lease in the process. So it went to TRC. It was a public meeting. It was a publicly noticed meeting. Mr. Clark did attend, and we discussed the issue of the new building location. Went to Scenic A1A. Is dated, approved 7-2 for the new building location. Not the parking. They had concerns about parking. They had other concerns about tree removal and stuff like that. I'll caveat all that. November 13th, it went to the Planning and Development Board. It was approved 4-1, and that's a site plan approval. Again, the site plan approval only. It didn't address all the parking issues and all those other issues. On November 19th, it was approved by the Board of County Commissioners 3-2. Scenic A1A letter rescinded their motion of support. No new recommendation for or against was passed. Board of County Commissioners, of course, you know why we're here today. So let's talk about the major lease terms of the new lease. 21 years with option for 5 more years. New rent, $1,000 a month. Net $2,000, almost $2,000. It's not quite $2,000. I'll talk about that. We eliminated the kayaks and bikes. We may actually pursue a different vendor for that for multiple sites. The footprint is 5,200 square. It's reduced, and the reason it could be reduced, it'll be a better organized facility. It'd be designed up front versus adding on components that are inefficient. County building, it'll be a county building, but it'll be captain's maintained. Insurance responsibility of captain. So even if they can't insure it in the county, actually the county wants the funds to come to it, they will have to pay the insurance bill of the counties. Other terms, up to 25 trees, additional seats, up to 50 allows them. Allows alcohol sales, currently only beer and wine. Eliminates extra uses, bikes and kayaks. 30 additional parking county, septic system county. And we changed the boat parking to non-dedicated boat parking. So we're gonna, that basin, or that platform was actually part of a launch platform, was directly on the intercoastal that couldn't work right because of the waves crashing into it. So we moved it over there, but we'd actually put slips there, and we'd still leave the kayak launch there. So let's talk about rent. So how bad a job the county did, or good job the county did. So rent's $780 a month. We're spending a bunch of different expenses throughout the year. Effective rent is about $280 a month. Once we pay for insurance, we do some of the repairs, we keep going back and abandoning stuff. The new rent is $1,000, but we have no county building maintenance. We have no county building insurance costs. The new buildings is gonna cost more, $4,000, based on our estimate from our insurance company. No county capital costs, $2,500. So effective rent is over $1,700 a month.
Who pays the utilities?
They do. They pay the electric and the water. In fact, the complaint we get from them sometimes is the pavilion runs through their meter, and sometimes that gets broken or left on, and they have to pay that bill. So they pay for that through the city of Palm Coast. Let's talk about additional monthly rent and the kind of the way the county looked at it. So we deal with these things at the airport. So additional monthly rent, let's say it's $750,000, let's say it's $1 million. I had $500,000, they said there's no way it's gonna be $500,000, they believe it's gonna be closer to $1 million. We aren't basing this on any reports we've gotten, estimates we've gotten of what their costs are. But that would add approximately $3,000 per month over 252 months, or $4,000 per month. And that's part of the reason why we wrote the lease discount the way we did. Also, there's information that says, oh, they're going to pay cash for this. No, they're telling us they're going to get a bank loan for these improvements, and interest is not included in these above amounts. I wanted to give you the airport example. If you build an example at the airport and you build a new building, we give you a ground lease for 25 to 30 cents, depending on the time. We've gone down as low as 22 cents. We'll give you a 30-year lease. The county doesn't own it during that period of time. During that period of time, we've seen tenants after 10 or 15 years, and you think about that in terms of mortgage, sell the remainder value of the building for 15 years. And by that time, the cost of building and valuation's gone up, so they can almost get their full money back sometimes at the airport for the last 15 years of that lease. So we throw that out, and again, we're talking about 21 years, not 30 years. And we're talking about an asset they don't have as a sellable asset during that time. They only have the term of their lease. So we looked at building solutions, options. I'll go through these quicker. Repair existing facility. There's no tree loss, more political support because it's a no change option. The problem is we don't know the taxpayer cost. I threw $100,000, it could be $200,000. You could pay for engineering. It could really structure up depending on what you want to get into if you keep going. Could trip building code thresholds, which would push you into option 2. Building closure. It's not as long as replacing the building, but you could still be down for a month or more. Loss of employees, loss of customers. Legal liability you still have there for the public injury potential that's out there. You have legal liability as landlord and indeterminate, and that's kind of what Mr. Hadid talked about. We'd still be on the hook for legal issues, still be on the hook for maintenance, meaning ongoing maintenance and capital, the roof replacement, the HVAC replacement, any other capital structures. And you're still going to have to potentially future rebuild it. Still not the code, still prone to disasters because it's not the proper elevations either. Option 2 is rebuild, same thing, same place. No more political support, no change option. The good thing at the end of the day, you get a new structure up to code, and hopefully you fix those issues. More tree loss, because some of the trees, taxpayer cost. We have an estimate for our staff's put together. We estimate it to be over $400,000. Longer building closure, we'll need an extended period, and that could be as little as 3 months, could be as little as 2 months, 2 to 3 months, could be as much as 4 months even. Legal liability, we don't know what that is. Future issues, we continue to have county responsibility. Future issues, continued county maintenance responsibility, ongoing and capital. And at the end of the day, we can't increase the rent. The rent is the rent. Oh, I think I already talked about that. Okay, more tree loss, tax, legal liability. I got two in there. Okay, site number 3. This is a site that's in the present lease we signed. Positives, it's not at taxpayer expense. No building closure. Slightly increased rent, larger net rent. Our liability goes away. Future issues, we have less legal responsibility. Future issues as far as maintenance, ongoing and capital are handled by Captain's Barbecue. And we have a new structure up to code. Negative, we have some tree loss. It's less popular because it's considered an impact to the view shed. It's perceived as a larger impact, not current location. And these are by no means, I'm going through these quicker, but these are by no means endless. You can really, depending on how you view on things, can really go a lot more in depth. 4 is where the current pavilion is. The current pavilion's underneath number 4. And it would take the width of the peninsula. You'd still leave a sidewalk, obviously, to get around the restaurant. Positives, there's no or minimal tree loss. And what you would, let me go back to this, what you would have is you would first take the pavilion, you'd relocate it potentially over here, and then you would then start on the restaurant. After this is complete, then you would demo this.
Would that go just about to the swale there, or that bridge that?
Yeah, we'd have to
needs
work on
repair?
that, and that might affect the layout of the restaurant, because there's in pacing it off, there's about 60-foot wide of buildable envelope. And then the lengthwise, if it was 85 before, it might have to be 90 or 95, which these boxes, it might have to go all the way out to, there might be a bigger thing here.
Yeah, you wouldn't use the same pad, though, that's there now for the pavilion.
No, this would be 100% new building up to construction. You'd have to do pilings. We estimate that some of this is
Have to raise it.
infill, and we estimate that will be, you got muck, so you have to use
It's
some
lower
pilings. Yeah.
With the waterway there, does it have to be a minimum height above the ground or not? Or-
Yes, sir. You'll get
Yeah.
into elevations with any new structure. Your elevations will be a lot different than what they are today, just because of the building code requirements. Less obstructing of view, believed less archaeological issues in this particular location. You probably have less construction disruption. Again, it's still not at taxpayer expense, no building closure, all those other issues. I'm not going to go over those. The other thing is new pavilion structure up to code. Captain's has offered to pay for that. We estimate the cost would be about $50,000, with us doing most of that in-house for the pavilion. It's still perceived as a larger impact because it's not the current location. It's a change to the park. This is an option that staff has resisted, but maybe if everyone thinks that's great, that'd be fine with us. But it's impact to the park usage of the current pavilion space. And one thing we've harped on is one of our more popular pavilions, and that doesn't mean it's rented more than any other pavilion. That doesn't mean, it just means it's a place that you can be on the water and that you have a grass field next to it, which allows you kind of expansion of group activities or family time out to that grass area that most people park people aren't into.
That seawall looks a little in need of work out there, too.
Seawall is always a
Yeah.
challenge. Yeah, we've made some Band-Aid repairs on that. Number 5 is over on the south parcel. The parcel C we talked about, that's the FTCT site, is here. We built the pavilion, we built those trails. So 5, and we just, again, this is not a engineered location. This is just a blob on a map to throw out the concept of using that as a separate site. Again, all the same features, it's up to code, not taxpayer expense, all that stuff is still pertinent as far as positives. Negatives, we estimate there'll be more tree loss, may be perceived as a larger impact, again, because it's not the current location. We are disturbing a new area of the park, and the big one is number 4, FCT site is restricted, and it's currently not permitted, but that doesn't mean you can't get approval, it just means we have to go through a process, and there's no guarantee we will get approved. There's a bridge repair that would need to be done quicker down there. We have 2 bridges that went over. One was removed during the hurricanes to allow stormwater flow. We have to make sure that we pave everything to ADA, probably, so it's a better system, but most of that's paved. That little section's paved anyways. This is not desired by Captain's Barbecue. And then parking on the south side, which some have really not been in favor of, begins to make a lot more sense as well. Alternate 6, we just threw this out there because I've heard people say this too. This is the caretaker's place. This is the main entrance to Captain's as you come in. This is on ESL, the original ESL parcel. Again, all the same things apply, building closure, legal liability, taxpayer expense, future issues. Negatives, we estimate there'd be a larger tree loss. There's a lot of trees around that house, less popular for restaurants' patrons. We don't think it'll be a good, because it's not on the water, it's not water abuse. Still perceived as a larger impact. The next ones down are probably the biggest ones, is dangerous traffic pattern. We think it'd create a lot of congestion at that entranceway. We think there would be some ADA and regular parking problems, meaning that if you have a lot of your parking on the south side, you'd have to walk across the park to get over there, and people would, human nature would want to park as close to the restaurant as possible. It's also not big enough, defeats the purpose in what I've said, and you may have heard me say this before. If this was a site, they need to go out and buy a site, and because you defeat the whole purpose of being in the park and the synergies with the park. And this is also not desired by Captains, and it may interfere. We may not, the last one, if we do have to go septic, that is probably the best location for septic, so we got to pick a different location for that. Overall, option map 1 through 6. This is kind of what it looks like. We just threw them out there. The options are endless.
Let me show something right here. What would the problem be putting it down here, away from everything down here in this open area?
Well, that's really a variation of 4, but you could do that. And Commissioner Mullins, that may actually be required to be down here further. Right now, you have a stormwater pond that's permitted right here. But all those could be addressed through engineering and relocation. And you're going to be dealing with the same issues. All this is basically infill from the intercoastal, we believe. So to summarize, we don't recommend options 1 and 2 because of legal issues and the cost issues to the taxpayers. So we recommend no on those. Number 5, we have permission from MCT and other issues. We recommend no on that. Option 6, we don't because of safety support issues, meaning septic and other issues, and that's the caretaker's place. We recommend really building locations, options 3 or 4, or even Commissioner Mullins, what you said would be fine with us. We just got to work through it. We think we still need to develop additional parking over time, incrementally and responsibly, but that's not before you today. We want to continue to seek sewer hookup with the dunes. And I want to add one more bullet, and that is where the current restaurant is, I would propose restoring that back to park property, basically. You'd open that up as green and make it a green space under the trees, if you can work around and demolish that and save the trees that you have there.
Now, the area I pointed out was not, that was dirt moved in and,
Yeah.
yeah. So in a sense, we wouldn't have to worry as much about
Archaeological.
archaeological
Correct, that's why.
issues there.
Yeah, that's.
So that would move it away from the park more and preserve that area, because my understanding is there is a lot of archaeological history.
Correct.
in
And
that one
And we
area.
think it's more, if Joseph Hernandez's site's here, it shows a string of buildings, but we don't know if the buildings were on a line like that, or if they were jogged or what have you, but that would have been in this area. It appeared to us much of this area was created out of backfill and fill over years.
So we're talking about 4 there? Of course, that
Three
would.
three or 4 is what staff's recommending.
Okay.
We're not recommending
But-
1 or 2, we're not recommending 5 or 6.
But 4 would follow through on that comment about sort of taking that grassed area away from the residents where I like to sit on my chairs out there.
So if you took 4, we'd probably rebuild the pavilion where 3 is, and it'd be much smaller. The pavilion is only a little over 1,000 square feet, so you're talking a fraction of that. We could probably do that without injuring any trees. 4 is not gonna really impact trees unless it impacts some along over on this edge. The area we're talking about 1 and 2, we could restore that back to parkland and put that into that. Parking wise, we've got issues to deal with over time. We've been slowly trying to upgrade the parking. We do have parking issues, but.
Yeah, just on 4, because I was over there looking at that again, and we've used that in the past. That pavilion's a nice pavilion there. But I think the further you push it down towards the intercoastal, even through that grassy area, the more view you're going to interrupt from the park. Where the pavilion is now, when you look at it, if you go over there and walk it, it does have a good view, but I think the further you push it towards the water, the more it will interfere with the rest of the view. So I think there's a balance there between the exact location, if you were going to go there.
I was just thinking it would be good to have it on land that would not be affected, that was, similar to the one in Valana Beach, Caps,
Yeah, I don't.
on the water,
But
having it close.
the other problem is the further you go towards the water, the lower that land gets. And I was in there yesterday, it's pretty, there wasn't anybody playing in there.
This is a stormwater pond right here.
Yeah, that's
if it's
a storm-
raining.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it could be dry at times.
I know.
Who owns that land south of where 5 is?
We
You know,
do.
We do? How
Yes, sir.
far south of that?
Well, I'll show you. Let me see if I can. Oop, wrong button. Let me go back to the beginning, and I'll show you the. Show you the parcels. Okay, so where I showed you 5 is probably right here, Commissioner.
Okay.
And then I walked the trail, and then we need some cleanup on the trail. But I walked the trail, but it goes all the way over to here and loops around, basically. But we own right to this point right here, and there's some houses as you go south of there.
And that location would not be agreeable to by the restaurant?
The
or
restaurant, it's not agreeable to the Captain's Barbecue. It's also problematic more so with FCT because it's a different deviation from our management plan. Now, they do approve deviations, but this would be kind of in the category of a larger one. And I know that also some folks were opposed to us building parking here. We could fit parking in here in the center of the loop, but with minimal tree loss. But if you build a restaurant over here, you probably want to build your new parking facility here. But if you, again, we've got to get approval, and there's going to be tree removal. We don't know how much until we site it and get into all the specifics there as well.
And we'd have to create another entranceway, though, into that?
Yes, and that's part of the problem with doing parking on the south side. When the FCT proposal was put in, it showed vehicle ramps coming across, which those are very expensive and not super practical. And then the parking entrance, you'd want to get it as far away from this congestion.
Intersection, yeah.
So you'd actually have to build it here, and you'd loop it in here. There's some draft plans. They're not ready for prime time, but we can, that's just parking thing. And in the way, we always think parking and some of these other solutions are going to be some combination of different solutions.
You have a greater impact to the residents to the south.
Yeah, and you'd have a greater impact to the residents to the south by the restaurant being there or parking being there as well.
Commissioners, if it's okay, I'd like to see if we can't open this up for public comment, just so we can, because otherwise we're going to run out of time, if that's agreeable to everybody. The other thing I would like to ask you is, Attorney West asked if she could give us a PowerPoint. It's not very long. So with your concurrence, we would give her an extra couple of minutes on top of the normal 3 minutes, if that's okay. I just want to make sure we're all in agreement with that.
I'm good.
Okay?
She'll be right back.
I was trying. Okay. So if that's okay, we could have the first speaker come up, and then we'll get her slot her right in there. I don't want to waste time. So going to open up for public comment. Please state your name, and you have 3 minutes, and please be respectful. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, everyone. Robert Garcia, Palm Coast. Hope everybody's doing well. Happy New Year to all. Thank you so much. First and foremost, after listening to the thorough explanation from legal counsel today and the presentation from Mr. Coffey, I feel more compelled than ever, more excited to support the project. That is the relocation and rebuilding of Captain's Barbecue. I think it's clearly evident that there's nothing evil, nothing nefarious here. All the cards are facing up. I've read some things on social media about, withholding information, the lease, this, that, the other. Everything is here available to the public, right? And today's presentation by Mr. Coffey was, I thought, very thorough, and even presenting, I think, up to 6, if I'm not mistaken, options, right? And then the economics associated with all of these. Really, at the end of the day, this is about some hardworking neighbors, Chris Herrera, Mike Goodman, Grace Goodman, operating a business, which is a benefit to all of us. There's jobs, there are taxes that are being paid, there's enjoyment. I think the food is great, my opinion. There's no evil ploy here, right? It's neighbors trying to operate a business and to do it legally and to do it right for everyone. Not their fault that there's been water intrusion decaying the structure. They're dealing with an issue that they did not create. They're dealing with an issue that they've been trying to resolve. So the economics based on, especially options, I believe 3 and 4, are very favorable to the taxpayers. I'll take this deal in a heartbeat. They're paying for a building. The building becomes property of the county. That's good for taxpayers. They're taking on liabilities, maintenance costs. It's a very favorable deal, and it comes about as a result of having to deal with an issue that I guess in some ways you might say have been created by Mother Nature, right? Water intrusion, an old structure, not up to code. Now we get a new building, a safe building, up to code, enjoyment, tourism, more money for the county, more tax dollars, and jobs. So for me, I think it's a win. I hope you'll continue to support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia.
Good morning, everyone. Jane West from Jane West Law on behalf of the Hammock Community Association. First of all, I would really like to thank you for this opportunity to work with you and try and come up with a solution to this difficult problem. And through the chair, if I may have a few minutes, since I am representing a large group of citizens, more than the 3 minutes.
Well, you stepped out, we agreed we would give you an extra
covered
few
it.
minutes.
Oh, okay.
Let's just be mindful of what we have there. All right, so go.
Okay, thanks. First of all, there is no legal obligation on the part of the county to accommodate a request for expansion and relocation. I just want to make that perfectly clear. The repairs contemplated in this engineering report that I just received yesterday afternoon are routine maintenance repairs. There's nothing in the report that suggests that demolition is the only option available to you. I'm sure all restaurant operators wish they had a landlord as generous as Flagler County, but that generosity is not a strictly private affair. That generosity is contemplated in the new lease at the expense of the public. There's certainly no obligation to allow for an expansion of the seating capacity. So what we haven't seen in this engineering report is an estimate on the cost to repair the floor. The county has a fiscal obligation to its constituents to understand the cost benefit for all of the options available to you guys. Currently, you're being forced to kind of make a decision in the dark here. You don't have all the financial information available to you to make an appropriately competent decision on behalf of the public here today. So I just kind of want to run through very quickly what we are facing right now. Currently, we do have an appeal of the site development plan. I'm not going to argue the merits of the appeal today because it is, as Mr. Hadid will point out to you, in kind of legal limbo is what I'm going to phrase it at. However, it is based on the environmentally sensitive lands acquisition policies inconsistency. As you know, Bing's was purchased with ESL funds, and the relocation and expansion of the restaurant is not consistent with the ESL program because it really elevates the level of commercial use on public lands. So if you take a look here, this is some of the funding that has been allocated for Bing's. This is what we acquired it with. Bing's Landing was purchased with ESL funding as part of an effort to preserve access to the waterways, as Mr. Hadid mentioned, protect the natural habitat and historical resources of the site. Just because they were discovered after the acquisition doesn't negate their value. They certainly are a draw to this iconic landmark here in Flagler County. And I should point out, this has been one of the most expensive acquisitions that Flywheel County has made under this program. So if we take a look, and there's all sorts of different ways you can slice the numbers up, right? It could be a 1/8 of a footprint. However, if you take a look, what is being contemplated is it's already 34% of non-green area in this park. This relocation plan is going to be a significant expansion of non-green area. This is what the building view would look like. And if you could just kind of take in for a second what that loss of vegetation is going to do to this iconic park. This is what we all come there for, right? We get our barbecue, we go sit out at a picnic table, and we enjoy the remarkable beauty of this site. And I should note that even though it wasn't acquired for habitat, the fact of the matter is this is one of the last strings of contiguous coastal hammock in all of Florida. This is a pretty special spot. So we may say, oh, it's just a cabbage palm here and there, but actually it's a totally cumulative loss of 71 inches of trees for this particular site. Now, the basis for the appeal on procedural grounds, and I'm going to touch on this because this isn't something we're really willing to quite let go. The staff improperly processed that site plan as a minor modification of an existing use. This is not a minor modification. This is a complete relocation of a building. It's not minor. Also, it is an expansion of the seating capacity and it contemplates alcoholic service. That is not a minor modification. It should have gone through the normal procedural process. In addition, the application is incomplete because of the septic capacity issues, the parking requirements, the archaeological impacts. So there's just so much left up in the air, so much that you're trying to make a decision with here in the dark. And that's not fair to you, and it's not fair to your constituents. You guys have already seen all the maintenance. Heidi did a great job of going through that. This is what the seating capacity actually is. This is not changed. This is where the maximum number of seating is currently. It's at 60 seats based on this, which if you've been there lately, this is what it looks like. This is 60 seats. That is the current seating capacity of the restaurant. So it's really important to keep that number in mind when we're making any sort of decision on seating capacity. Now, if it has been changed, it hasn't been changed with the state of Florida. So if there is some sort of change, that has not gone through the proper procedural mechanisms. This is a little bit of just the expansion history. It originally started around 1,500 square feet. Now we're at about 4,500 square feet. What's being contemplated now, I believe, Mr. Coffey, you said is 5,400 square feet. Okay. The first lease agreement, Commissioner Holland asked that any structure built would not take away from the natural scenic environment. That does not give us a lot to work with, but what I will say is that options 3, 5, and 6 are strongly objectionable to my clients on this basis alone. Procedural due process is really important here. It's been one of the issues that was raised in the appeal, and we do have real concerns with the fact that this engineering report was just received yesterday. And I do want to make a note that there is precedent-setting case law on this issue. The city of Miami, there was a Rusty Pelican restaurant facility in Biscayne Bay that completely burnt to the ground. This is a public park that the city of Miami Beach owned, and it was a restaurant facility with full bar service, burnt to the ground. The court did hold that an RFP was necessary when it went out to bid. However, the case was dismissed on other grounds based on it wasn't brought in time. But I want to put it out there that even when the building completely burnt to the ground, an RFP should have been done for that. So there is legal precedent for this. There are cheaper solutions available to keep this existing restaurant facility in place. We can use gutters, we can use berms, we can make repairs that don't trigger the 50% threshold requirement. We would respectfully ask that the county make a decision that does not have a fiscal detriment to the county, that takes into consideration the iconic natural value of Bing's Landing, that takes into consideration the pending appeal, and that despite this being an executive action by the county, there is nothing that bars a declaratory action in circuit court to determine whether the ESL have been complied with, the comp plan's been complied with, and the code has been complied with. And again, we would just like to reiterate that options 3, 5, and 6 are strongly objectionable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. West.
You ask her, is option 4 acceptable?
Choose 3, 5, and 6.
4 acceptable? Does that mean 4 is acceptable?
4 is the pavilion.
Good morning.
Hey.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman,
Good morning, sir.
Commissioners,
Your name, please,
ladies
sir?
and gentlemen. I'm Bob Goodwin. I live on Island Estates in the Hammock. I guarantee you I won't use a lot of words. I'm here to support the decision that you made. Being a resident of the Hammock, captains is an important part of the quality of life and the options we have for going out, both for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's an important part of lifestyle in the hammocks. I think from what I've heard and what I know that has transpired, it seems like the commissioners have taken into account the facts and have made difficult decisions that seem to benefit the county, the Hammock residents in the area, in the best way while giving the investor operators an opportunity to be successful. So I support you in your decision, and I hope you stand by it.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Next speaker, please.
Good morning. It's difficult to talk after some of the people who have already been up here. You feel like you're talking over them. I certainly support their right to publicly give their opinions on these issues.
Your name, sir?
I know they're important. Yes.
Sorry.
My name is Gary Browse.
Thank you, sir.
I'm a former NGO of the United Nations, Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. I was a director for 30 years at the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, which represented religious institutional investors. We went into, our portfolio was in the billions of dollars, and that was Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, and Native American organizations that had these investments. I represented them in front of corporations. We had similar issues with corporations when we first went to them. They had no policies or practices regarding the indigenous community, and that's what's brought me here today. In the research that I have seen that has been done around this area has been very little from indigenous scholars, leadership, or institutions. And I think it's important to hear their perspective. It's a little different from a lot of the people that you are hearing from today. They have another perspective, which is just as valid. But we also think that the indigenous perspective has some say-so. The historical value that this property has, we don't oppose any commercial improvements to the property. We do, however, disturbance and destruction of property, which would destroy the historical, cultural, and sacred areas of that property, we do object to. And I would just submit that there are alternatives to the proposals that have been introduced today. We've done these with corporations. After hearing our issues, they've been implemented into their programs and changed them greatly in what they were able to do without any additional cost. I know the original purpose of this property was public access. It seems to have turned into a commercial venture, and that's not what it should be about. It's very unusual to read your history, but to actually visually walk through it and see it brings a different perspective to your children and to yourselves. And so I would just say that you please look into the indigenous leaders, the scholars, the leadership, and listen to what they have to say about this kind of a proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Browse. Next speaker.
Good morning, Chairman O'Brien and Commissioners. My name is Jorge Gutierrez. I am the president of the Flagler Chamber of Commerce. And for those who don't know, the Flagler Chamber of Commerce have been in existence for over about 55 years. And during those 55 years, we've grown about 750 members, and we've touched about over 3,000 families. We've held true to our mission, which is to engage, provide, and promote a thriving business climate in Flagler County, in balance with the community. It is in light of the mission that the Chamber supports Captain's Barbecue in its bid to expand their current business at Bing's Landing. The expansion of Captain Barbecue will increase the economic growth, create more jobs, add tax dollars to the county, and send a clear message to other businesses that Flagler County is business-friendly community and a viable business option. On the other hand, if Captain Barbecue is forced to close down, it will result in additional economic business and ramification, which includes but not limited to the loss of business revenue that will have a negative impact on the county, force employees currently working at the restaurant to lose their jobs, and send the wrong messages to other business considering expanding or relocating to our county. So with that, the Chamber is in full support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. Next speaker, please.
Gary Levi, Flagler County citizen, and also chairman of the Economic Alliance Council at the Chamber. I'm speaking to you here this morning because there's many facets to economic development. One is image and the face that we put on economic development and our support. The other is what we have available for our citizens in terms of dining and entertainment. This is an enhancement project. Yes, there's still more work to be done, and I applaud the administration staff as well as the county commissioners because you're asking the right questions about what are we going to do relative to the environment as well at the same time and balancing that. And those details can be worked out, and I believe much to the satisfaction of those that are concerned about this project in particular. The owners of Captain's Barbecue are both good corporate citizens and community citizens, and I don't think that should be lost here. They're willing to invest $1 million into this property and give it to the county. Yes, there will be favorable lease terms, but also too, when you really calculate all the numbers and the facts that you've calculated into it, it comes pretty close to what a market rate would be for such a property, and then to have that economic enhancement from a tourism standpoint also helps us. I believe being committed to the community and maintaining this property and facility as the lease structure was explained earlier is also a positive for us as citizens here in Flagler County and taxpayers. We respect the process at the same time that you all are going through, and we support the approval of this and moving forward with this project for Captain's Barbecue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Lubai. Next speaker.
Peter Bizette. I support Captain's Barbecue, that it is good for the community. Why should we keep fixing the building like putting lipstick on a pig? And it still won't be up to code. As taxpayer, none of the money comes out of my pocket. I give them great credit that they're gonna pay for a new building and give it back to the county. So I think it's a win-win situation for both of us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
Good morning. My name is Dale Patchett. I live at 26 Medford Drive in Sea Colony in Flagler County, out in the hammock. I'm here before you today as an urban forester. I have been in the forestry business as an urban forester for 45 years, all of it in Florida. Trees don't have a voice, so therefore I'm their voice. The trees at Bing's Landing I have done a thorough assessment of. Most of those that are in the Sand Road areas and the high use areas are definitely under stress. They won't live as long as we'd like them to, but that's just because of the traffic. The trees immediately surrounding the existing Bing's, existing Captain's building, can be built around again. We don't know how old that building is, but I know how old those trees are. They were mature when those buildings were built. If you can build around them once, you can build around them twice. So one option is you can rebuild with proper engineering and good construction practices. But the trees would prefer, if you're going to do anything, to move to your alternative 4. There are no trees at risk. It's filled land. I also served as a member of the staff to the Florida Board of Trustees, which owns and controls all state lands of Florida. So I know filled land when I see it. There's no archaeological problem there. There's no real engineering problem there. You can put it up on pilings. You're going to have to meet the code anyhow. You're in a flood zone. Why doesn't anybody figure that out? So it's all engineering. It can still work on pilings and still have your stormwater retention pond that's there that your county administrator says is popular with people as an open area. Yeah, it is. But when it's wet, you don't play in it. And it's a design pond. It's not a design playground. So I speak for the trees. If you do anything, stay away from killing the trees in the middle of the park, putting any more of them under stress. Put it on a sewer system, please. Just look at Brevard County South, and you can test the water of Florida. It's septic tanks that's killing the Florida. So get ours off of there. I don't care what that costs. The long-term care of that water body requires sewer. So that's my part. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Paget. Next speaker, please.
Morning. My name is Henryk Dzięszewski. I live in Palm Coast, and I'm pit master in Capitan Barbecue. I have no mic since I was 18. Now I'm 52. When I first started work for him, he is the reason why I buy home for my family in here in Palm Coast. My daughter grew up in here. She attended school in here. After Mike retired, we keep in touch. I continue work for his partner in New York. Soon I decided it was time to leave my job north and come to Florida to be with my family. And again, I start work for Mike and Chris. I find it very difficult that some people fail to realize the effect they protest have directly on my life. I depend on this job to pay my mortgage, feed my family, and live an ordinary life. Many people here do, inside the walls of Capitan. We have fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, and students. We have the girl who got it's single mother with 2 children. We got single father with 3 children. They got flexible working time, which is not easy to get job with that. We have always find Mike Goodman someone that we can rely on, and he has never let nobody down. I appeal to Commission to allow the rebuild of Capitan's Barbecue at the location proposed or alternate location suitable for business. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Next speaker, please.
Good morning, Todd Book. I'm a resident in Hammock. Certainly, you've done your due diligence, and you need to make a decision. You own the liability. This county owns the liability of this situation. And whether you talk about financial, whatever it is, a decision has to be made. I suspect that Captain's Barbecue today could say that this county is in default of not providing a building that they said they would provide. That would be a big problem. I don't know what they're making there, but I suspect it's pretty good profit. You're going to be, I'm not a legal expert, but having owned a business, I know that if you don't give them a place to do business, they're going to ask you, in a nice way, I suppose, through the court, to pay their profits for the remainder of their lease. You brought that up. It's been, obviously, that's one of the issues. So you have to make a decision. They're effectively donating the building to the county. They're paying for it. It's been brought up that an effective lease price would be in that range that it's going to cost them, but you own the building. You don't have any expenses, dramatic expense reduction. So if you were to, and I support it, obviously, a plan of some sort to get this done, I think that you've done your, as I said, due diligence by having this workshop. And once you see all the information, it becomes pretty obvious that you need to approve something there. You know, and I know Mike and Chris, if I were you, I'd go with the new proposal that Mr. Mullins brought up, because it's a better view for the whole way around. But the fact is, it needs to be done. So if you vote on this, and I don't know if you can vote on it, not having multiple options, but vote on some plan, I would expect it to be unanimous this time and not have any nays. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. Next speaker, please.
God, I hope I can make through in 3 minutes. Jane Gentile Hughes.
You will.
I'm going to read you some facts. This is not a jury trial. There are a total of 50 pages of leases since 2011. I just asked the commissioners by a show of hands, has any commissioner read all the leases? Thank you. Not many. Okay, the very first lease, Mr. Hadid, let me correct you legally, although I'm not an attorney, not in this life. Page 11, the original lease. Non-liability of lessor to lessee, page 12. Loss of revenue is not covered. Loss of revenue could only be covered if there was a revenue share in part of the original lease. Jane West, the attorney, please correct me. There is no promise of revenue back to the county, therefore the county has no liability, and this term shall inure forever. Bind and inure, section 32. The covenant shall bind and inure. Secondly, the 150 seating capacity is nothing but a scam for them to get 4C. How many people here have looked up the rules to get a 4COP SRX license? That is a full liquor license. Mr. Coffey shows wine and beer. Baloney. They need the 150 seats by state statute to get the full liquor license. This is 80% of the scam. The security. We are spending thousands of taxpayers' dollars in staff time and staff money. And guess what? Captain's Barbecue, since 2011, has a $1,000 security deposit. However, as a realtor for 40 years, if I were doing a lease, I would have a copy of that $1,000 initial deposit. Where is it? Thirdly, there are so many mistakes. In the lease in 2016, it gives a Captain's Barbecue credit for spending $100,000 of their own money for improvements. That amount has now jumped up to $300,000, yet there is no attachment, there is no substantiation of a damn penny that they have ever invested. And this is our property. It does not belong to them. They need to go and find, and the county, you buy rotten hospitals, everything you buy is lousy. Now, if Captain's paid $300,000 to improve the building, why is it in such crappy shape now? I think some people here need to be fired and some people need to go to jail. All the money you're spending, my money, everybody's taxpayers' money, for a lousy $1,000, and these people are going to get a 4COP license, which, by the way, Mr. Coffey, they're not allowed to get. Only the property owner can get a 4COP SRX. You're going to sign for the liquor license over my dead body.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes. Next speaker, please.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Marge Roy-Akers, and I am the president of the Hammock Community Association. I am here to, first of all, thank you for your service. And secondly, I am here to express some of the concerns that we have over this present lease. Ideally, we would love the restaurant to stay where it is. We would love for it to be able to be fixed up and to stay where it is. Hopefully, you will investigate that to the last nth degree before you make a decision. And if it is proven that it is absolutely not possible, I think our choice again would be your option 4. But that's if the original building cannot be fixed. We are, as an organization, committed to conservation, and we do want to conserve the nature of our park. Therefore, we would like to have no additional parking spaces added that would take up more green space. We don't care if you remodel the parking areas that you have to provide more parking. That probably would be a good idea. But we would like to please not take any more of the park to put into parking. The increase in occupancy also is something that we would prefer not to have happen, as the park is already the park is for all of the patrons, not just for a restaurant. We have no objections to the present restaurant. That's fine. But we would prefer that it stay the size that it is, if that is again possible. We also would like to have, not to have a regular liquor license in the park. The park is a family park, there are children, and the park is the heart of the hammock. We would really appreciate it if you would keep it for the residents and the families to use as a recreational area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roy Akers. Next speaker, please.
Good morning. I'm Steve Hatcher. I live in the Hammock.
Yes, sir.
The Flagler County's Environmentally Sensitive Land Program Manual is included in the packet distributed to the commissioners. It's about 100 pages long, and it describes the objective and rationale for the program. As Al Hadid said, the Bing's Landing was purchased for recreational activities. It also has an economic thrust, and the idea is that by purchasing these environmentally sensitive lands, it'll improve the look of the community, it'll attract residents, and it'll attract tourists. This in turn will generate economic activity outside the park. In other words, it's not intended to create activity within the park, it's activity outside the park. And this would include bringing new businesses to the community, preserving existing businesses, and stimulating real estate development, all of which adds to the tax base and to the value of properties. The expansion of the restaurant is going to serve to the detriment of existing restaurants like 386, JT's, the Atlantic Grill. This new restaurant with an expanded scope right on the waterway is going to cannibalize this other business. So basically, the commissioners are in the business of picking and choosing who wins and who loses. Further, the Newcastle Boatyard is in the process of preparing plans to put in a new 130 boat storage facility. And they also plan to put in a 5,000 square foot restaurant that would be on the waterway. This proposal is going to frustrate, or should probably frustrate, part of their plans. So once again, this picking and choosing is causing the commissioners to work against themselves. And I really think that you ought to think through what is the economic development plan, what's consistent with it, and what's inconsistent with it. And you should be encouraging outside investment. And I think that Captain should be kept at the size that it is and the scale that it is. If you have to build a new building, build it. But keep it the scale the same as today's. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hatcher. Next speaker, please.
Hello, I'm Dennis Clark, and I'm going to try to speak for the community. I've been speaking with them a lot recently, and I live in the Hammock. I live on Ocean Shore Boulevard in the Hammock. This park has a special meaning to the community, and as we have learned, many others outside the local community. As you know, parks are a primary motivator for people looking to relocate, and it was for my wife and I, even without a restaurant in 2004. It's a community park where folks bring their children. It is not a place for a large restaurant and a bar. Besides its historic value and that of a boat launch, it is a model of what the Hammock represents. A peaceful place where you can appreciate the unique, rapidly disappearing maritime hammock with its live oaks, cedars, palms, and others. It gives us a sense of place. That is why people are so passionate and why there is so much opposition. Changing the character of this park is unacceptable to those folks who cherish it in its current state and now have a feeling of lost trust in their local government. The restaurant has simply outgrown the park. Leave it where it is, because increasing its size will change a small, beautiful park into a parking lot for a restaurant. Anything larger should be located elsewhere. At a minimum, any changes proposed other than repairs should go back to start the process over with a complete master site plan review, which would include a complete parking plan showing any new driveways onto A1A or vehicle bridges, an environmental impact study, a more in-depth archaeological study, full permitting and septic system analysis, elevation plans and tree survey, and a comprehensive community review. This park belongs to the people, and you represent the people. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Randy Odom. I live in the Hammock Beach area, and I'm trying to open a little restaurant in the Hammock Beach area. It's been taking me 2 years. I'll hopefully get it open in the next couple months. I just want to point out a few facts, additional facts that you don't have yet. 5 properties have tried to open small restaurants in the Hammock Beach area in the last 2 years. All of them failed the county's rigorous process for getting approval to do that type of a business. The septic system wasn't large enough, the seatings weren't large enough, the parking wasn't large enough. That's 5 businesses that haven't been able to get through the county process, yet this project goes through without a septic plan or a parking plan or anything else. I had a stack of paper this big that I had to submit in order for you guys to say, yes, you can do yours, a small little breakfast lunch place. The 150 seats, the issue that was brought up. And so my point back to the Chamber of Commerce guy, 5 properties, this is not a good business thing. This is not a positive business thing. This is something where you are picking and choosing who are the winners and who are the losers in this whole scenario. The 150 seats, we're paying for those additional seats. And it was pointed out that approved is 60. I went to the Department of Health. Originally, the approved seats were 0. It was a concession stand in the document. In 2014, it got bumped from 0 to 60. They have over 100 seats in there now, and nobody even goes and checks. Haven't been in there to check. So they're letting it just run rampant. So again, it's picking and choosing. 60 and 100 seats. So we really, the other part of it is in that lease agreement, they have showed favoritism once again in signage. They're allowed to have 4 signs, plus the monument sign that's already out there. I'm allowed to have 1 sign. Anybody else is allowed to have 1 sign. And those get managed extremely with a lot of rigor, trust me. The last thing I want to say is I was standing back there waiting to speak my piece. This whole thing has been so divisive. I was waiting back there to say my piece, and as I'm standing there, Mr. Goodman walks by and calls me a derogatory word, combination of words. So again, when people talk about it, this has become very divisive, and it's become very personal for some people. And I think that you guys need to take that into consideration as you continue to show favoritism to this type of behavior and acting out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. Folks, the clapping just wastes time for everybody else to get their time in to speak, so I really would appreciate if we don't do that. Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name's Jim Quinn. I'm a Flagler resident, also a small business owner within the surrounding area. I've been going to Captain's for right around about 3 years. Oftentimes I take folks that I'm trying to gain their business. I go to Captain's on a regular basis and conduct business due to the nature of the setting. Captain's is set back. You can sit back, relax, discuss business. You're not in the downtown area, so to speak, with the hustle bustle of other businesses, other people, traffic, etc. I've been to the last meeting in regards to Captain's, and I'm here now. I've heard all different types of concerns. I've heard concerns about alcohol. You know, the Daytona Speedway is a family place also. There's alcohol there. It's 2019. There's alcohol everywhere you go. There's nothing you can do about it. That's just the world that we live in. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm up here talking. Small businesses always impact the local economy. Typically, it's in a positive manner. We all know that. There was a gentleman that was up here that spoke, and he's an employee at Captain's Barbecue. Small businesses employ local people. We often forget about the impact that small businesses have. Everyone's running 100 miles an hour. Large businesses come in, and they shut all of us small folks down. Happens every day. They put the small people out of business. Happens every day, probably happens every minute, and it's going to continue to happen. Instead of trying to push out small businesses, we should be trying to embrace small businesses to keep them within our community. The county, after these folks pay money out of their pocket, loans, whatever the case is, at the end of the day, they're responsible for that money. The county owns the building. It's the county's building. I don't know about any of you folks in here, but I've dealt with a whole bunch of building inspectors in my lifetime, and I can tell you, at any given time, the county can own that building outright, and these guys can be out of luck. And that's just the way it is. At the end of the day, I support this project, this expansion project. It's obvious that there's been a tremendous amount of information given to the county. A large group of county elected officials have reviewed this. It's obvious we saw what the voting process has been in favor of this project. So at this point, I don't know why we're still wasting time and energy on it. We should just move on, put this project in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Next speaker, please.
Hi, good morning. Abby Romaine, resident of the Hammock, and good morning, friends. And past president of the Hammock Conservation Coalition, which is now known as the Hammock Community Association. And I've been here a while. I've seen a lot of these things transpire over the years, and I have to say that my heart is very heavy, and I'm greatly saddened that our community has been divided over something that should not be divisive. We should all be working together to find common ground solutions and being collaborative in our approaches and finding that way through so that we can have wonderful things in our community, like this restaurant, which is nationally known and has brought a lot of positive attention to our community, located in the beautiful, wonderful Bing's Landing that the county has been, was wonderful in purchasing that land for our public use. There is a ray of light, though. However, today, even though there's a lot of rancor and tension in the room, there is a win-win solution embedded in this presentation. And that is option 4. Option 4 lets us keep our employees at Bing's still employed at Captain's Barbecue. It creates a solution where we're not taking down any trees, where the archaeological disruption is not really an issue, even though I strongly suggest we continue that whenever we are digging around. Being an anthropologist myself, I hope that we do that. And also, we can enable the business to continue. And I would also remind you that Miss West and the current president of the Hammock Community Association, also agree that option 4 is a good option for everyone. Everyone can be happy with option 4. So please consider that. I thank you for your time. And also, I just have to say, Charlie, I love those socks. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Next speaker.
Hi there. My name's Joy Ellis. I live in the Hammock. I want to point out that Bing's Landing is not a resource just for the Hammock. It is a resource for all of the county residents. It is a park that is well used for many purposes other than coming to Captain's Restaurant. I also like to point out that Captain's Restaurant has had the benefit of growing their business within the park. They have developed a clientele, they have developed a reputation, and therefore they want to expand. As Mr. Goodman said recently to a committee meeting we were part of, he wants to have an upscale restaurant serving steak and chops and liquor, which is not consistent with what Mr. Coffey presented to the Dune CDD in terms of just paper service. Really, the crux of what I want to say is this. Please get all the information before making a decision. The structural analysis pointed out to you that their report was limited because of the limitations of their ability to see some of these areas in the building. Get the full information before you make a decision to abandon that building, which is the preferred option for all of the people who I think have been in opposition. No one has opposed their staying in that building, just the expansion. The other point to consider is, even if the Dune CDD was willing to provide the wastewater, there are costs to be incurred in this, and I think you want those fully analyzed. Not only the cost to get the pipes over there, but additional pumping stations or enhancement to pumping stations that are there. My point is this, please don't make a decision till you have all the information. Get a complete report before you abandon that building. The health department says this is a 60-person occupancy restaurant. Let's keep it at that. Let's not expand the parking. Let's not expand the septic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Ann Butler. I live in the Hammock. And I would just like to reiterate another option that would be the acceptable and a win-win for everyone. And that is, if you can keep that building, please keep the building. Let's be creative. Let's get the best builders in to see how they could correct the deficiencies of the building. Let's be creative on how we can keep Captain's business going while work is done. Hammock Beach Club has a beautiful tent they use for events. There are mobile kitchens. Let's just really put our heads together, try to find a solution to keep Captain's busy, keep the employees working, and keep the restaurant in keeping with the nature of the park. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we go to our next speaker, I just need to check with you commissioners because we said we had a hard time of 11:30, so what do we want to do here?
I'll take 30 seconds.
Well, hold on, sir, please.
Go to Gainesville at 1, and Commissioner Erickson has appointment at noon.
So y'all need to tell me what y'all want to do. Okay. No, I don't believe that.
I can probably give it
Speak up.
10, 15 more minutes.
Yeah,
but,
that's about what I got, 10, 15 minutes at best.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's do 15 minutes. Chairman, if we can do 15 minutes, then cut it. I've got to.
Okay, so we're going to finish with who we have in line, and that's going to be it for our speakers for today, and we'll wrap it up. Okay? All right, thank you for your patience, sir.
You bet.
Yeah.
My name is Dave Naraki. I am a resident of Flagler County. I have never been to Bing's. I've never been to Captain's Barbecue. Doesn't affect me one way or the other. Anybody that knows me knows that I am not a big fan of Craig Coffee or some of the decisions that have been made. I don't know where the situation sits right now as far as the restaurant and the community, but I think that everybody needs to slow down. If you can save the building, save it, but we tried to save a hospital that is ridiculous. I would prefer to rebuild the building, and if the community wants it on site for, I'm fine with that. Why tear down a bunch of trees to put a pavilion, put the pavilion where the old restaurant was, or whatever? I'm just here to say, if there is a vote on Craig Coffee next week, we should do a darn thing. I am here to support the residents of the Hammock, not to support anybody else. So slow down, don't make any crazy decisions, vote on Craig's fate next week, and start over fresh if and when he is no longer the county administrator. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Steve Evans,
Yes, sir.
resident of Flagler County. I'm very nervous. God bless America that we get a chance to come here and everybody gets a chance to speak their mind. And I think we've whipped this horse pretty good today. I'm here to support Chris and Mike. One of the things that hadn't been mentioned is their generosity to the community and supporting other causes that haven't been brought up today. I think that we should be blessed that somebody's willing to spend their money, take their risk to improve the community. And I'm very uncomfortable up here, but I feel that I love the place, I like the guys, and I'm very impressed with the report that Mr. Coffey presided and with the council. I think we got a lot of information that we didn't have before, and I think that the pros and cons were very well presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Good morning. Jay Livingston. I am the attorney for Captain's Barbecue, and I'll be quick. I just wanted to note one important thing, just so there's no improper implications. There's a lot of discussion about legal liability, but at no point from when the first water intrusion issue was discovered, 5 years ago to when it became a critical issue towards the end of last year into this year, at the beginning of last year into this year, has Captain's ever made any threat of litigation against the county. We have approached this issue from the get-go in a collaborative effort to solve a problem, and I think today is a wonderful example of us working towards that. But I just wanted to make sure that was clear on the record, that there has not been any threats of litigation on our part, and nothing has been filed, prepared, briefed, and/or sent to the county in that regard. Secondly, and I think, luckily for me, the last two speakers kind of covered two things that I wanted to mention, but one is there was a comment made earlier by Ms. West about this being a routine repair, and I think the environmental report speaks against that in the sense that the building is below grade. Puddling and flooding of water in the foundation was one of the findings in the report, and one of the suggested fixes to that was to install a sump pump. So that's not a repair. That's essentially putting a pump into a hole because water's going to be going into it. And yes, it may solve the problem, it may slow it down, but as the previous speaker said, we shouldn't get into the business of trying to put a Band-Aid on a bad building. You guys are already dealing with enough fallout, and another example that I don't think we need to go into. And then there was also a comment made about the generosity of the county, and I was a little confused about that because if we have to rebuild in a different location because of the condition of the building, my client is the one that's funding that. So I'm not sure what the generosity of allowing us to spend up to $1 million refers to, but I was a little confused about that. But it goes to an important point about what was put in Mr. Coffey's report about the net rent that you currently are getting under the current lease. Because if you replace or rebuild the current building, then it's under the existing lease. and the rent remains the same. And the net rent at this point is $280. Once you go in and you repair that building, I assume that net rent will now be in the negative for the remaining term of the lease, and that does not, to me, seem fiscally responsible, particularly when my client is willing to contribute such a significant amount of money to rebuild a building that will be yours from the beginning and result in a significant increase in the net rent over what it is today, because of the additional costs that we're also going to assume, like insurance, maintenance, et cetera. So for that, I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Next and last speaker, please.
Mike Affatato. I live in Plantation Bay. I've been a resident of Flagler County since 1984. I retired down here into this beautiful little community, and I have seen such terrible handling of our county administration. I am appalled. We elected you people as our stewards to maintain and oversee what's done in our county, and obviously it is not being done. And obviously we could look at the history over in Bunnell, what took place, and I'm not going to go back over that issue. It's not for this time. I have nothing against Bing's Landing being a restaurant, which it never should have been, because if we go back to 2010, what was advertised by Mr. Coffey was a bait store, not a bait store with a restaurant. He never put that out as a bait store and a restaurant, but he hooked up with Mr. Goodman and it became a restaurant. Now, my question is, at the last meeting, and I got up and I spoke quite angrily about what transpired and what is transpiring to this day. Mr. Coffey was asked by you folks, did he do an examination of that building? And he said, no, he did not. Why not? Why didn't he call in our building inspectors to do it? He just rebuilt a building over at the old dump where the Rams fly their airplanes, totally restored that building. You can go look at the old pump building. It's a brand new building. He found time to get that done, but he doesn't take time to take care of the issues at hand that involve our public facilities. I don't think that you people should have voted so quickly at the last meeting. We asked you to hold it off. No, it was shoved down our throat because they were getting it done because Nate McLaughlin was going out that day and our new commissioner wasn't there at the time. Okay, I think that we should get building inspectors in to check that building. I've owned many real estate properties in West Hampton Beach on the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, I've had homes elevated to 18, 20 feet above the dunes. Okay, they moved it off. Coffey is making no effort because it's for his advantage and for Mr. Goodman's advantage to stick a bar, okay, with a 100-foot restaurant, 100-seating restaurant down our throats. We don't need that, Mr. Coffey, especially if you're leaving. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, sir. All right. I'm going to close public comment and bring it back to the board for any additional questions, comments. We want to wrap things up.
Yeah,
Mr. Mullins?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to, you know, one thing I'd like to talk about or real quick say, we're here today because of lack of transparency, a rush process. I've talked to a lot of people throughout this community, and I think this process has hurt a business. It's definitely affected the trust in the county government. And a lot of the people I talk to are not against the business being there. This is emails and information that I've been sent, and I know you guys have got a lot of it, but this is our community's voice. And it's very important to me that we really look at this. And I've got a question. I mean, I would like to ask the group out here, how many people, if this building isn't salvageable, or if we look into it and it really is a big issue, how many would be okay with option 4? By show of hands.
With no growth?
I don't think we want,
I just,
Commissioner, I don't think we want to have
Oh,
this
okay.
discussion.
I think we're
I got
losing,
Yeah.
let's get back to the
I got you.
chairperson.
Yeah.
So I, you know, I would like to see us, you know, I'd like to know another thing too, the bank loan. One of the issues that I've concerned, who is how is the bank loan secured? Does it?
It's not permitted. County cannot have a mortgage on its property. No one can place a mortgage on our property. There is no, they'll have to secure it personally or through their own house or other assets, not through anything of the county's.
Okay, all right, that's something I wanted to see. And, you know, we've done a lot of leases like this. We've done a lot of things like this. I think the biggest thing is the transparency leading up to it. I think we know a lot more information today. I think we...
Who's we?
The community. I'm speaking for the community. We in the community. If I can, I know a lot more information. Is that better, Charlie?
Doesn't help much, but keep going.
Okay. I know a lot more information today. I feel a little better with it, but that's all I have at this moment.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have to say something at this point. I think this was good today. It was good. I think we need to go on now with the information we received and what the feeling of most of the people here is. Take a hard look at option 4, see what that involves, and see if it's doable with the owners, so on and so forth. But I've got one other thing I've got to say today. I can't talk to the other commissioners any other time about this. There's one big issue in this city right now, and it's the Sheriff's Operations Center. I am stating at this point, just so you all know, I am not willing to put one more nickel into that building. The only money I'll ever approve now for that building is to demolish it. And I think at this point in time, we need to establish a task force. I want a commissioner on that task force to find out what's going on and come up with a plan of action and milestones for replacing, first to come out with a more robust interim solution and then a long-term solution. I know this is a tough issue, but I don't think we can kid ourselves any longer, and it's time to do something. I just want to make that point clear. That's my opinion, and I think that's the most important thing we face right now, not anything else.
Okay. Commissioners, so we need to wrap this up so that we stay within our time frame. I'm assuming we don't want to proceed with a special meeting at this point during this workshop and go to a special meeting and push this to a regular agenda item?
The biggest thing for staff would be is if you have any additional areas you'd want us to research or bring information back to you on. We did send out the revised engineer's report, but we still see some issues with it, just to clean it up some more. But if there's anything else, or if there's any other direction, or when the next meeting would be it be another workshop? Would it be another meeting? How would you like us to pursue or move forward for your consideration?
Mr. Chairman. Yeah,
Commissioner?
I would like to see a little bit more data on option 4. I don't think we should, I think where the pavilion is where we would do it. I think moving it out into the wetlands there would be a mistake. So, but I think option 4 where the current podium is probably viable. I still think moving it just north is the right answer, and a lot of the arguments have fallen on, they're not really valid about putting it up there. I think we lose a couple trees. But if we can keep everybody happy and on board by moving it down to position 4, I think at least we need to look at that a little closer than we have. So I would think that we get another report from the county staff on comparing 3 and 4, and kind of look at the pros and cons of both of those, and what's doable and what's not doable, and have that presented at a regular meeting. And then
your preference
I think we
would be
should
for
go
a
to a regular meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Commissioner Erickson,
Yes, sir.
You agree with that?
Yeah.
And I would also, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, Chairman, what I was going to say is I would like to also see some hard expense in renovating the building and considering some of the legal remedies that could face.
Okay.
Although I've never heard the restaurant threaten it, say it, I just still would like to see those 2 issues.
Okay. And I also would be in favor of something around option 4, and I would also be in favor of doing that at a regular meeting and not a separate workshop for that. And, ask you to do that, Mr. Coffey.
That's helpful.
I would tend to agree with that.
There may be some legal ramifications of the fact that the lease was already signed for the expansion. But as long as the owners are willing to go along with that procedure, I'd be go along with that also.
The business interruption and/or, I forgot the other term, will be a little bit more difficult to put our finger on. I will tell you, we did do the cost of the replacement. The estimate from our Assistant General Services Director is $400,000. And we feel that option one, which is to fix or repair, is going to trip us into the threshold that will cause us to have to rebuild to bring everything up to code. But we can have our building official do an analysis of what that financial determination would be at the 50% level, because he could tell us that's up to him to make in the code.
Last thing, I wanted to just react to what you said, Commissioner Sullivan, with respect to the Sheriff's Operations Center. I would be very much in favor of us having a discussion at a future meeting of having one point person from us, work on that and be our representative, so to speak. Not make decisions, but be involved in all the day-to-day machinations of that. And I'm hoping maybe we can put that on our agenda for this coming Monday and get that resolved as well. So I would support that. So
I agree.
Okay.
Good.
All right.
I agree wholeheartedly, and Dave, thanks for bringing that up.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move we adjourn.
Yep. We got a motion,
Second.
second. We're adjourned. Thank you.